This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've always been the curious type. The kid who asks too many questions, who stays up late reading about weird stuff online when I should be sleeping. That's probably why what happened to me 4 years ago still haunts me. I was 13 then, living with my parents in a house that backed up to a massive stretch of woods in rural Pennsylvania. Our nearest neighbors were about half a mile down the road, which usually meant peaceful nights and a killer view of the stars. That changed on a Tuesday night in October. I remember it was a school night because I'd been annoyed about having to go to bed early. My room was at the back of the house with a window that faced the forest. I must have fallen asleep around 10 and everything was normal. Dead quiet except for the occasional owl. Then at exactly 2:03 a.m., I remember checking my alarm clock. I was jolted awake by what I can only describe as an earth-shattering boom. It wasn't like thunder. It wasn't like an explosion from a movie. It was like someone had taken the sound of a massive steel door slamming shut and amplified it by 1,000. The walls of my room actually vibrated. My first thought was that a tree had fallen on our house. I literally fell out of bed. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I scrambled to my feet and rushed to the window, pulling back the curtains. The woods behind our house were completely still. The moon was bright enough that I could see pretty far into the tree line, but nothing looked disturbed. No fallen trees, no fire, nothing. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. It had come from the right side of the house, toward the eastern edge of the forest. My mind was racing. Maybe a car crash on the highway? But the highway was over 2 miles away. A transformer explosion? But then the lights would be out. Just as I was about to go wake up my parents, it happened again. Boom! This time, I was already awake, already alert. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that the sound came from above the forest. Not from the ground, not from the trees, from the sky. It was so loud that my ears rang afterward. I could hear my dad yelling from their bedroom, asking what the hell that was. My mom was already in the hallway. I ran out of my room and told them I'd heard it twice now. We all went to different windows. Mom checked the front yard, Dad the west side, and I went back to my window. We found nothing, no damage, no disturbance, nothing that could explain sounds that powerful. Dad grabbed a flashlight and actually went outside to check around the house. He came back in after 10 minutes looking confused and a little freaked out. "There's nothing out there," he said. "Not a damn thing." We stayed up for another hour, waiting to see if it would happen again. It didn't. Eventually, we all went back to bed, though I don't think any of us slept much. The next morning at breakfast, we were all groggy and still weirded out. My dad suggested it might have been the victory cannon from my high school. They fire it during football games when our team scores. But that didn't make sense. For one thing, it was Tuesday night and games are on Fridays. For another, the school is 4 miles away. And while you can hear the cannon from our house, it's more of a distant pop than the window-rattling boom we'd experienced. Mom thought it might have been thunder, but the weather had been clear. I remember checking my weather app that morning. There had been some small clouds, nothing that could generate lightning. I spent the whole day at school distracted, searching for answers on my phone whenever I could. That's when I first learned about skyquakes. Apparently, they're a documented phenomenon, unexplained loud booms that seem to come from the sky. They've been reported all over the world for centuries, Some scientists think they might be caused by meteorites, or by cold air trapped between warm air layers, or by underwater gas escaping. None of the explanations seemed to fit what we'd heard. After school, I dug deeper. I found a government website where you can look up flight records for different areas. I searched for our county during the hours of 1:03 a.m. the previous night. Nothing. No commercial flights, no military exercises, nothing that should have been in our airspace. The not knowing was driving me crazy. My parents seemed ready to just file it away as one of those weird things, but I couldn't let it go. I decided I was going to find out what was happening. For the next few nights, I forced myself to stay awake until 2 a.m., sitting by my window with the lights off, watching the forest and the sky. Nothing happened Thursday night. Nothing Friday night. Nothing Saturday night. By Sunday, I was exhausted, but still determined. I set an alarm for 1:30 a.m. and managed to grab a couple hours of sleep beforehand. When the alarm went off, I silenced it quickly and took up my position at the window. It was colder that night. I remember because I had wrapped myself in my comforter while I sat there. The forest was dead still, no wind. The moon was in its first quarter, so it wasn't as bright as it had been earlier in the week, but I could still make out the outline of the trees. I checked the time on my phone. 3:47 a.m. I was starting to think this was pointless and was about to give up when something caught my eye. At first, I thought it was just a shooting star, a quick flash of light in the sky above the tree line. But then I realized it wasn't moving laterally across the sky like a shooting star would. It was coming down. I pressed my face against the glass to get a better look. About 100 feet above the tallest trees, there was a sphere of light. Not like a spotlight or a beam, a perfect sphere, maybe the size of a beach ball from my perspective, but obviously much larger given the distance. It was glowing white with a slight bluish tint around the edges. I fumbled for my phone to try to record it, but before I could even open the camera, the sphere started to... I don't even know how to describe it properly. It shook, vibrated, like someone had grabbed it and was shaking it violently. The light flickered and pulsed, and then, in less than a second, it shot straight back up into the sky. The movement was so fast that my eyes couldn't track it. One moment it was there, the next it was gone. I sat there stunned, my phone still in my hand, the camera app now open but useless. For maybe 10 seconds, there was nothing. Then, boom! The same sound we'd heard earlier that week. The walls shook. A book fell off my shelf. The sound was so massive it felt like a physical force pushing against my chest. I was too shocked to move for several minutes. When I finally got my wits about me, I ran to my parents' room and woke them up, telling them it had happened again and that I'd seen something. My dad was irritated at being woken up, but when he saw how freaked out I was, he listened. They both did. The problem was, I knew how it sounded. A glowing orb that shook and flew away. They believed I'd heard the boom. They'd heard it too, after all. But the rest? My mom gently suggested that maybe I'd fallen asleep at the window and dreamed the light. But I hadn't been dreaming. I know what I saw. The next day I scoured the local news websites and social media to see if anyone else had reported the noise or the light. There was nothing. I even called the local police non-emergency line to ask if they'd received any reports. The officer I spoke to said they hadn't, and I could tell from his voice that he thought I was just some bored kid making things up. For weeks afterward, I kept my nightly vigil, but the phenomenon never repeated itself. Eventually, I had to give up the watch. I was falling asleep in class, and my parents were getting concerned. But I didn't stop researching. I read everything I could find about unexplained aerial phenomena, skyquakes, ball lightning, you name it. Nothing quite matched what I'd seen and heard. The closest I came to an explanation was an article about something called earthquake lights, glowing orbs that supposedly appeared during seismic activity. But there had been no earthquakes in our area, not even small ones. It's been 4 years now, and I still don't have answers. I've told this story to a few friends, but I can tell they think I'm exaggerating or that I saw a drone or something ordinary. I've mostly stopped talking about it, but sometimes, when I'm home from college on breaks and staying in my old room, I still find myself waking up around 2 a.m. and looking out at those woods, wondering if I'll ever see that strange pulsing light again, or hear that impossible boom that seemed to crack the sky open. I know what I saw that night. I know what I heard, and sometimes knowing something happened but having no way to explain it is scarier than any explanation could be. I still check flight records occasionally, still scan the news for reports of similar occurrences in other parts of the country. Still wonder if someone else, somewhere, is sitting at their window right now, witnessing the same inexplicable phenomenon and feeling the same chill run down their spine that I felt 4 years ago. The worst part isn't the mystery. It's the certainty that something was out there, something that defies everything I understand about how the world works, and the knowledge that, for a brief moment, whatever it was seemed to take notice of our little corner of the world before vanishing back to wherever it came from. I don't know if it will ever come back. Part of me hopes it doesn't, but another part of me still watches the sky, especially on clear, quiet nights, waiting for that flash of light and the sound of the sky cracking open once more. I've debated posting this for a long time. It's been 3 months since it happened, and I still wake up in cold sweats. The therapist says writing it down might help, so here goes. I've been fishing all my life. Started when I was 5 with my dad's old rod at the community pond, and by 18 I was bringing home enough bass and trout to feed the family twice a week. Titan River has always been my spot, about 35 miles north of town, tucked away where tourists don't bother going. The fishing's incredible there, especially for smallmouth bass in the early evening. That day was supposed to be like any other fishing trip. I packed my gear around noon, my lucky rod, tackle box, the small cooler with sandwiches and beers, and my grandpa's old fleece-lined jacket because October evenings get cold fast up here. I almost didn't bring the flare gun. It was a last-minute decision, tossing it into my backpack just in case. I've run into black bears before, and they usually leave you alone, but better safe than sorry. The drive to Titan River is beautiful this time of year. The maples were fiery red, and there was that crisp smell in the air that only comes with autumn. I had my windows down, sipping gas station coffee, feeling pretty damn good about life. I remember thinking how perfect everything was. Clear skies, temperature in the mid-60s, wind calm enough that casting wouldn't be a hassle. I parked at the small gravel lot around 3 p.m. There were usually a couple other trucks there, but that day it was empty. I figured the forecast for rain later might have scared people off, though the sky looked clear to me. The solitude didn't bother me. I've always liked having the river to myself. I hiked about a mile downstream to my favorite spot, a bend in the river where the current slows and deepens. There's a fallen oak that creates the perfect place to sit, and the bass tend to gather in the pool just beyond it. I set up my gear, cracked open a beer, and started fishing. The first couple hours were perfect. I caught 4 decent-sized bass, kept 2 for dinner, and released the others. The sun started setting around 6:30, painting the sky and water in these incredible oranges and pinks. I decided to try a spot a little further downstream I'd been wanting to check out, more secluded, where the river narrows between 2 rock faces. That's when things changed. Looking back, the first warning sign was the silence. It happened so gradually I didn't notice at first. Normally, as dusk falls, the woods get louder, frogs start up, owls begin hooting, all that. But everything just stopped. No insects buzzing, no birds, nothing. Just the soft gurgle of the river. I remember checking my watch, 7:15 p.m., and thinking maybe I should pack up. But the fishing had been so good, and I had my headlamp for the hike back. Just 15 more minutes, I told myself. Then I heard it, a twig snapping behind me in the tree line. I didn't think much of it at first, probably a deer or raccoon. But then another snap, closer this time, and another. Whatever it was big, and it was moving deliberately. I turned my headlamp toward the sound and called out, "Hello, someone there?" I figured maybe another fisherman had wandered down. No response. That's when I smelled it. Jesus, that smell. Like roadkill that's been baking in the sun for days, mixed with something metallic like copper. It hit me so hard I gagged. As I was gathering my things to leave, I heard a low, guttural growl. Not like a bear or a cougar, I've heard those. This was wrong somehow. It sounded almost human, but distorted, like someone trying to mimic an animal sound with a damaged vocal cord. I stood up, heart pounding, and turned my headlamp toward the trees again. The beam caught something moving between the trunks about 20 yards back. I almost wish I hadn't seen it. It was tall, much taller than a person, maybe 7 or 8 feet. At first, I thought it was just a weird-shaped tree in the darkness, but then it moved. The thing was impossibly thin, like someone who'd been starving for months. Its skin, if you could call it that, looked gray and was stretched so tight over its frame you could see every bone. Its arms hung down past its knees, ending in these long, twisted fingers that looked more like branches than human appendages. But its face, God, its face. The headlamp beam only caught it for a second before I dropped the light in shock, but that was enough. It had a vaguely human shape, but stretched and wrong, with a mouth that opened much wider than it should. And its eyes, they glowed like embers in a dying fire. They weren't reflecting my light, they were generating their own. I ran, left most of my gear right there and just ran. The path back to the car was narrow and overgrown, and branches whipped across my face as I stumbled through the darkness. I could hear it behind me, moving through the woods much faster than something that size should be able to. It wasn't running. The footsteps weren't right for that. It sounded more like it was gliding or leaping between the trees. I was about halfway back to the lot when my foot caught on a root, and I went down hard. I tasted dirt and blood as I scraped my face along the ground. Before I could get up, I felt it. It was right there, hovering over me. The smell was overwhelming now, and I could feel its breath on my neck, hot and reeking of decay. Those long, branch-like fingers wrapped around my ankle. The skin was rough like bark, but moved like flesh. It started to drag me backward toward the deeper woods. In absolute panic, I remembered the flare gun in my pocket. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grab it, but somehow I managed to pull it out, twist around, and fire directly at the thing. The red flare burst like a small sun in the darkness. For just a split second, I saw it fully illuminated, its body even more horrifying in the crimson light. The skin across its chest was split open, revealing a rib cage that expanded and contracted with unnatural movements. but it was the look on its face that still haunts me. Not surprise or fear, but hunger. Pure, primal hunger. The creature let out a shriek that didn't sound like anything I've ever heard before. Part human scream, part animal roar, all wrong. It released my ankle and recoiled from the light, giving me just enough time to scramble to my feet. I don't remember much of the rest of the run. Just trees flashing by, the burning in my lungs, and the absolute certainty that if I slowed down, even for a second, I was dead. Somehow, I made it to my truck, fumbled the keys into the ignition, and peeled out of that lot like a madman. The entire drive home, I kept checking my rearview mirror, convinced I'd see those glowing eyes in the darkness behind me. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely keep the wheel straight. I must have run 2 red lights, but thankfully there weren't many people out that late. When I got home, I locked every door and window and sat in the bathroom with the lights on all night, a kitchen knife in my hand. I couldn't stop shaking, couldn't eat, couldn't even think straight. The next morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined it all, some kind of weird hallucination from dehydration or exhaustion. But then I saw the bruises on my ankle, 5 distinct marks where those fingers had gripped me, already turning a deep purple black. And there were scratches too, shallow but definitely there, in a pattern no human hand could make. I spent the next week researching local legends, trying to make sense of what happened. That's when I found the stories about the Wendigo, a creature from Native American folklore, specifically Algonquian tribes that used to inhabit our region. According to the legends, it was once human, but became transformed by cannibalism and dark magic into something monstrous. Always hungry, always hunting. The descriptions matched exactly what I saw: the emaciated frame, the 2 long limbs, the glowing eyes. I eventually worked up the courage to talk to my uncle. He's half Ojibwe and knows the old stories better than anyone. When I described what happened, he didn't laugh or tell me I was crazy. He just got real quiet, then got up and locked his front door. "You're lucky to be alive," he told me. "Very few people encounter a Wendigo and survive to tell about it." He performed some kind of cleansing ritual with sage and cedar that day. Said it would help protect me, but also warned me never to return to that spot again, at least not alone and never at night. He gave me a small leather pouch filled with herbs to keep with me. Said it wouldn't stop the creature, but it might give me warning if it was nearby. The herbs would wilt in its presence. It's been 3 months now. I haven't been fishing since. Can't bring myself to go back into the woods, even in daylight. I've told a few close friends, but they think I had some kind of panic attack or encountered a bear. My girlfriend is concerned about my dramatic personality change. I was always the outdoorsy one, always planning our camping trips. Now I can't even sleep with the window open. I know what I saw. I know what grabbed me. Sometimes at night, I can still smell that copper death odor, like it's somehow stuck in my nostrils. And sometimes, when I'm driving home late and pass by the road that leads to Titan River, I swear I can see something tall and thin watching from between the trees, its eyes catching the headlights for just a second. I don't know if I'll ever go back to those woods. Part of me thinks I need to face whatever's out there, to prove to myself I'm not losing my mind. But every time I consider it, I feel those fingers on my ankle again, and I remember the hunger in those glowing eyes. The thing that scares me most isn't just that it exists, it's that it let me go. Sometimes I think it wasn't the flare that made it release me. Sometimes I think it was toying with me. And sometimes, in my darkest moments, I worry it's still hunting me. that it knows where I live, that it's just waiting for the right moment. If you're ever fishing around Titan River and the woods go quiet, don't wait around to see what caused it. Just run. And whatever you do, don't look back. I still can't explain what happened that morning at Lake Morrison. I've been fishing my whole life. Started when I was just a kid with my dad. I've seen weird stuff on the water before. Strange lights, animals acting crazy. Even what I thought was a body once turned out to be a mannequin some sicko dumped. But nothing like what happened 3 months ago. Nothing even close. My buddy Alex and I had planned this trip for weeks. We both needed to get away. Me from my mind-numbing accounting job, him from his divorce proceedings. The lake was about 2 hours from town, not super well known, but had a reputation for good bass fishing. We'd never been there before, but Alex's cousin had mentioned it was a solid spot without too many other fishermen to compete with. We arrived at the campsite Friday night, set up our tent, had a few beers around the fire, and crashed early. The plan was to be on the water before sunrise to hit that morning bite. When my alarm went off at 4:30 a.m., I immediately noticed how thick the fog was. I could barely see 10 feet in front of me when I unzipped the tent. "Dude, you seeing this?" I whispered, nudging Alex awake. He groaned, checked his phone, and peeked outside. "Holy shit, that's dense." We debated whether to wait it out, but decided to stick to the plan. We'd brought headlamps, and the fog would probably burn off once the sun came up. Besides, I'd fished in fog plenty of times. It can actually be great for fishing since the low visibility seems to make the fish less cautious. We loaded our gear into the small aluminum boat we'd rented from a guy near the campground. It was nothing fancy, just a basic 14-footer with a trolling motor, perfect for 2 guys and our tackle. The lake was eerily still as we pushed off from shore. The fog seemed to swallow all sound except for the gentle lapping of water against the hull and the soft whir of the electric motor. I can't really explain it, but something felt off from the moment we got on the water. Like when you walk into your house and somehow sense someone's been there, even though nothing is obviously disturbed. The air felt heavier than it should have, and despite the typical summer morning temperatures, I kept getting these random cold spots that made me shiver. "You feel that?" I asked Alex about an hour in, after we'd navigated to what looked like a promising cove. "Feel what?" He was focused on tying on a new lure. "I don't know. Just something weird." He shrugged. "Probably just the fog playing tricks on you." Maybe he was right. The fog hadn't lifted at all, which was unusual. If anything, it seemed thicker. The sun was definitely up by now, but you couldn't tell except for a faint glow that made the white mist look slightly yellow in places. We couldn't see the shoreline anymore, couldn't see much of anything beyond maybe 20 feet from the boat. We fished in silence for a while. I wasn't catching anything, which was making me irritable. Alex had landed 2 decent smallmouth, but my line remained untouched. I kept getting distracted by what I can only describe as movement in my peripheral vision, like someone was circling our boat just beyond where the fog allowed us to see clearly. "Do you see that?" I finally asked after nearly jumping out of my skin when I caught a dark shape moving to my right. "See what?" Alex sounded annoyed. He was in the zone, that focused state serious fishermen get into. "I keep seeing something moving out there in the fog." He finally looked up, scanning the mist around us. Probably just birds or something. But I knew it wasn't birds. Birds don't move like that. Slow, deliberate, like they're studying you. Around 8:30 a.m., the strange feeling intensified. The temperature seemed to drop suddenly. I'm not talking about a slight chill. I mean, it felt like someone had opened a freezer door right next to us. My breath started fogging in front of my face. What the hell? Alex finally noticed it too. It just dropped like 20 degrees. That's when we both became aware of the silence. Complete, absolute silence. No birds, no insects, no distant sounds from other boats or the shore. Even the water seemed to still completely. The only sound was our breathing, which seemed unnaturally loud. Maybe we should head back, I suggested, reeling in my line. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, something that didn't want us there. Alex nodded, finally seeming unsettled himself. Yeah, this fog isn't letting up. Not much point anyway if the fish aren't biting. As he started to reel in his line, I felt rather than heard something move in the water beneath our boat. A displacement, a shift in pressure. Not like a fish, something much larger. I leaned over slightly to look into the dark water. That's when I felt it. A distinct sensation of being watched intently, malevolently. The kind of feeling that triggers every primal alarm system in your body. "Alex," I whispered, not taking my eyes off the water. "Start the motor." "What? Why are you whispering?" He wasn't being quiet at all, and his voice seemed to echo unnaturally across the water. "Just start the fucking motor," I hissed, still not looking away from the water. I couldn't explain it, but I knew with absolute certainty that if I looked away, whatever was down there would emerge. Alex must have finally sensed my fear because he set down his rod and moved to the back of the boat without further question. That's when I saw it, a faint glow in the depths below us. 2 points of reddish light, like eyes, slowly rising toward the surface. As they got closer, I could make out a vague humanoid shape around them, but all wrong. Elongated, twisted like a body that had been underwater far too long, but was somehow still moving with purpose. My entire body went cold. I couldn't speak, couldn't move, could barely breathe. "The motor's not catching," Alex said, his voice tight with the first real notes of fear. He pulled the starter cord again. The glowing eyes continued their steady ascent. I could see more details now. What might have once been a face, stretched and distorted beyond recognition. Long, pale limbs that moved through the water with unnatural grace, and surrounding it all, a kind of darkness that seemed to absorb what little light penetrated the water's surface. "Alex," I managed to choke out, pointing with a shaking hand. He looked where I was pointing, just as the figure rose close enough to the surface that its features became clearer through the dark water. I'll never forget the sound he made. Not quite a scream, more like all the air being forced from his lungs at once. Because now we could both see it clearly. A human shape, but wrong in every possible way. Its skin was pallid and seemed to ripple like it wasn't quite solid. The face had hollowed eye sockets with those glowing red points deep within them. Its mouth was open in what looked like a silent scream, much too wide for any human face. "Go, go, go!" I screamed, as Alex frantically pulled the starter cord again. The small motor finally sputtered to life just as a pale, elongated hand broke the surface of the water beside our boat. The fingers were impossibly long, ending in what looked like claws rather than nails. Water didn't drip from them. It seemed to cling and flow around them unnaturally, like the hand was made of the water itself, yet somehow solid enough to reach for us. Alex cranked the motor to full power and swung us around in a sharp arc that nearly capsized the small boat. I grabbed my fishing rod, not because I was thinking clearly, but out of some instinctive desire not to leave anything behind. As we sped away, I made the mistake of looking back. The figure was now fully visible from the chest up, rising from the water in silent pursuit. Its upper body was emaciated, with ribs clearly visible through skin that seemed almost translucent. But what terrified me most was that it wasn't swimming after us. It was walking or gliding beneath the surface, moving with deliberate purpose, those red eyes never leaving us. Then it opened its mouth wider, impossibly wide, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. A sound cut through the fog, a high, keening wail that didn't sound remotely human. It was like metal scraping against metal, but with an organic quality that made it so much worse. The sound physically hurt my ears and reverberated through my chest. "Faster!" I yelled, though the little trolling motor was already at its limit. The shore was still invisible through the fog, and for a terrifying moment I wondered if we were even heading in the right direction or just deeper into the lake. I felt something then, an icy sensation on the back of my neck, like cold, wet fingers brushing against my skin. I spun around, swinging blindly with my fishing rod, connecting with nothing but air. But the sensation persisted, spreading down my spine like ice water being poured slowly down my back. Alex was hunched over the motor, his knuckles white as he gripped the handle. "Do you see the shore? I can't see anything in this fucking fog." I squinted into the gray wall ahead of us. "Just keep going. It has to be this way." The wailing behind us grew louder, and the water around our boat began to churn and ripple as if affected by the creature's presence. Small waves slapped against the aluminum hull, rocking us dangerously. The temperature dropped even further, until it felt like we were surrounded by freezing air. Something bumped the bottom of the boat, hard enough to nearly knock me off my seat. Then again, more forcefully, tilting us precariously to one side. "It's under us," Alex screamed, his voice cracking with terror. I grabbed the sides of the boat to steady myself, just as another impact came from directly beneath, lifting the back of the boat several inches out of the water. The motor momentarily left the water, whining at the sudden lack of resistance before Alex could adjust it. Through a break in the fog, I finally glimpsed the shoreline, maybe 50 yards ahead. "There! Go straight ahead!" As if sensing our imminent escape, the entity's attacks intensified. The boat shuddered as something scraped along its bottom from stern to bow, a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard, but magnified 100-fold. Then I saw long, pale fingers curl over the side of the boat just inches from my hand. The skin wasn't just pale, it had a bluish-gray tinge and seemed to be peeling in places, revealing something darker underneath. Water flowed upward around those fingers, defying gravity. I did the only thing I could think of. I brought the heavy end of my fishing rod down on those fingers with all my strength. There was no cry of pain, no reaction at all, except that the fingers slid back into the water, leaving behind a viscous, dark substance that wasn't quite blood on the boat's edge. The shore was getting closer, but the fog seemed to be thickening around us, as if trying to prevent our escape. The wailing had stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence that felt even more threatening. "Don't stop when we hit shore," I said to Alex, my voice barely above a whisper. "We beach this thing and run straight for the car." He nodded without turning around, his entire body rigid with fear. Just as the boat's hull scraped against the lake bottom near the shore, I felt that icy touch again, this time wrapping completely around my ankle. I kicked violently and felt my foot connect with something solid, yet yielding, like striking dense gelatin. The boat ground onto the pebbly shore, and Alex immediately leaped out, stumbling forward onto dry land. I tried to follow, but found myself held back by whatever had gripped my ankle. Looking down, I saw that same pale hand wrapped around my leg, its grip inhumanly strong. "Alex!" I screamed, clawing at the side of the boat as I felt myself being pulled backward. He turned and, seeing my predicament, rushed back to grab my arms. For a moment, I was stretched between two forces, Alex pulling me toward shore, the entity dragging me back toward the water. The pain was excruciating, like my joints were being pulled from their sockets. Then suddenly, the pressure released. I fell forward onto Alex, and we both tumbled onto the rocky shore. Scrambling to our feet, we looked back at the boat. There was nothing there, no creature, no disturbance in the water. Even the fog seemed to be receding slightly, though still thick enough to obscure most of the lake. The only evidence of our encounter was a dark, viscous substance smeared on the edge of the boat and a matching stain on the ankle of my jeans. We didn't speak. Didn't need to. We grabbed what gear was nearest to us, leaving the rest in the boat, and ran through the woods to where we'd parked the car. The entire time, I felt those red eyes on my back, watching us flee. We threw our minimal gear into the trunk and peeled out of there, not even stopping to break down our campsite. Left everything, the tent, the cooler full of food, our sleeping bags. None of it mattered. We just needed to get away. The drive home was silent except for our heavy breathing gradually slowing. About an hour away from the lake, Alex finally spoke. "What the fuck was that?" His voice was hoarse, barely audible. I shook my head. "I don't know. I don't want to know." We never spoke about it again after that day. Never mentioned it to anyone else either. Who would believe us? I threw away the jeans with that strange stain. Burned them, actually, after noticing the fabric around the stain was deteriorating, breaking down like it had been exposed to some kind of acid. I haven't been fishing since. Can't bring myself to go near any body of water larger than a bathtub. Alex moved to Arizona a month later. Told everyone it was for a job opportunity, but I know better. He wanted to be as far from large bodies of water as possible. Sometimes at night, I still feel that cold touch on my ankle. Still see those glowing red eyes rising from the depths when I close my eyes. Still hear that inhuman wailing that seemed to bypass my ears and vibrate directly in my chest. I don't know what that thing was. Don't know if it was specifically after us, or if we just happened to be in its territory. Don't know if it was once human or something else entirely, but I know it's still there, walking the lake bottom, waiting for more unsuspecting visitors to venture out into the fog. And I know with absolute certainty that if I had gone into that water, if Alex hadn't pulled me free, I would have become like it. Another pale shape moving beneath the surface, another set of glowing eyes rising from the depths. I've never really told this story to anyone outside my family. I'm 23 now, but I was 12 when it happened, and honestly, I still don't know what to make of it. It's been over a decade, but I remember that morning like it was yesterday. I grew up in Atherton, Australia, a small town in far north Queensland. Nothing special about it really, just your typical rural Australian town surrounded by farmland and patches of forest. Our house was on the edge of town, and every morning I'd walk to the bus stop at the corner of what we called L Street. It was actually Lancaster Avenue, but everyone just called it L Street. The bus stop was just this small grassy field with a bench. Nothing fancy. That particular morning in autumn was foggy. Not super thick fog, but enough that everything had this grayish tint to it. The air felt damp and cool against my skin. It was around 7:35 a.m., and I remember checking my watch repeatedly because I was worried the bus might be late, and I had a math test first period that I couldn't miss. I was just standing there in my school uniform, backpack feeling heavier than usual because I'd packed extra books to study during lunch. My glasses kept fogging up, which was annoying, so I kept taking them off and wiping them on my shirt. A family I recognized from the neighborhood walked past, a mom with 3 kids, probably heading to the primary school down the road. They said "morning" as they passed, and I nodded back. They continued up the hill, and I was alone again. That's when I noticed something weird. Across from the bus stop was this small thicket of trees that led to a swampy area. Local legend had it that back in the 70s, teenagers used to go there to drink and mess around with Ouija boards and stuff. Just typical small-town rumors, you know. My friends and I were always too scared to go there after dark, but in daylight, it was just trees and mud. But that morning, something was different. As I was waiting, I glanced over toward the trees, and I saw them. I still get goosebumps thinking about it. There were these things rising up from the ground at the edge of the trees. They looked like tentacles, but not like octopus tentacles from the ocean. These were coming out of the earth. I counted 3 or 4 of them at first, but as I stared, I realized there might have been 6. They were tall, maybe 8 to 10 feet high, and completely black. Not dark gray or dark brown, but pitch black, like they were made of shadow itself. They didn't move much, just swayed slightly, like they were part of the morning mist, but somehow separate from it too. My first thought was that my eyes were playing tricks on me. The fog, combined with the early morning light, was making me see things. So I took off my glasses to clean them, thinking maybe they were smudged or something. But even without my glasses, and my vision isn't that bad, I could still see those dark shapes rising up. I put my glasses back on, and they were still there, clearer now. These tentacle things weren't solid like an animal or a plant. They seemed to both absorb and emit the mist around them. It's hard to explain, but they didn't look natural. They didn't belong there. The weird thing was, I wasn't exactly scared at first, more confused and fascinated. It wasn't until a few minutes passed that a sense of unease started creeping up my spine. Those things weren't moving like the wind was blowing them. They were moving on their own, with purpose. I looked around to see if anyone else was seeing this. The family that had passed earlier was still visible up the hill, so I actually ran after them. My heart was pounding as I caught up. "Excuse me," I said, trying to sound calm, but probably failing. "Do you see that, over there by the trees?" The mom looked where I was pointing, then back at me with a puzzled expression. "See what, sweetie?" "Those black things coming out of the ground, like tentacles or something." She squinted toward the trees. Her kids were looking too now. "I don't see anything, just the trees and fog." "Are you sure? They're right there." I pointed again, more urgently this time. She gave me that look adults give kids when they think they're making things up. "I think it's just the trees and the fog playing tricks on your eyes. Nothing to worry about." They continued walking, the youngest kid looking back at me with curiosity. I heard him ask his mom if there were monsters in the trees, and she hushed him. I went back to the bus stop, feeling stupid and confused. Was I going crazy? I took off my glasses again, cleaned them thoroughly on my shirt, and put them back on. The tentacles were still there, gently swaying. I couldn't stop staring at them. They seemed to be concentrated in one area, near where the ground dipped down toward the swamp, almost like they were growing out of a specific spot. I thought about taking a picture with my phone, but back then I just had this old Nokia brick that didn't even have a camera. All I could do was stand there and watch them. The bus arrived at 7:42. I remember checking my watch again. As it pulled up, I glanced back at the tentacles one last time. For a split second, I could swear one of them moved differently, like it turned toward me. Not that it had a head or face or anything, but the top part of it seemed to bend in my direction. That's when the first real wave of fear hit me. I practically leaped onto the bus when the door opened. My friend Jake was already on board, sitting in our usual spot near the back. I sat down next to him, my hands shaking a little. "You okay?" he asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I opened my mouth to tell him, but something stopped me. How do you tell someone you just saw impossible tentacles growing out of the ground? Even as a kid, I knew how that would sound. So I just said, "Yeah, I'm fine. Just worried about the math test." The whole ride to school, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. Had I imagined it? Was it some weird trick of the light? But it had looked so real. By lunchtime, I'd managed to convince myself it was probably just some strange natural phenomenon, maybe smoke or oddly shaped mist patterns or something. The school day dragged on forever. I couldn't focus on anything. I'm pretty sure I failed that math test. All I could think about was getting back to that bus stop to see if the tentacles were still there. When the final bell rang, I rushed to catch the bus home. The ride seemed to take hours. I kept my face pressed against the window as we got closer to my stop, straining to see if I could spot those black shapes from a distance. But I couldn't see anything unusual. The bus dropped me off at the same spot around 3:30 p.m. The fog had cleared completely by then, and it was just a normal sunny autumn afternoon. I stood there for a while, staring at the spot where I'd seen the tentacles that morning. There was nothing there now, just trees and underbrush, and the dip leading down to the swampy area. I actually worked up the courage to walk closer to the trees. I'd never gone right up to the edge of the swamp before. All those stories about it being haunted had kept me away. But that day, I needed to see for myself. The ground was damp and squishy under my shoes as I approached the exact spot where I thought the tentacles had been. There was nothing unusual there. No holes in the ground, no strange plants, nothing that could explain what I'd seen. Just wet earth and fallen leaves. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, looking for any sign of what I'd witnessed that morning. Part of me was relieved that the tentacles were gone, but another part felt disappointed, like I'd missed my chance to figure out what they really were. Eventually, I gave up and walked home. I tried to tell my mom about it that night, but she just said the same thing as the woman at the bus stop, that it was probably the fog playing tricks on my eyes. My dad wasn't any more helpful, suggesting maybe I'd dreamed it while dozing off waiting for the bus. But I know what I saw. I wasn't dreaming, and it wasn't just fog. Those tentacles were there, rising up from the ground like they belonged to something massive underneath the earth. The strangest part? I went back to that same bus stop every school day for the next 6 years, and I never saw anything like that again. I kept hoping and also dreading that they might reappear, but they never did. I've had a few other weird experiences in my life. Once I'm pretty sure I saw a ghost in my grandmother's house, and another time I heard voices coming from an empty room. But nothing has stuck with me quite like those tentacles. Maybe because unlike ghosts or voices, which you can kind of explain away as your mind playing tricks on you, these were so physical, so present. They had dimension and movement. They were real. I've researched similar sightings online over the years. The closest thing I've found are stories about shadow people or shadow entities, but those are usually human-shaped, not tentacle-like. I've read about people seeing strange things near swamps or in foggy conditions, but nothing exactly like what I experienced. What's weird is that I don't remember feeling threatened by them. Unnerved, yes. Confused, definitely, but not in danger. It was like witnessing something that wasn't meant for human eyes. like accidentally glimpsing behind a curtain that separates our normal world from something else. I'm in college now, studying environmental science. Sometimes I wonder if what I saw was related to some natural phenomenon I just haven't learned about yet. Or maybe it was something supernatural. I don't know if I'll ever find out. I still visit my parents in Atherton during breaks, and sometimes I walk down to that old bus stop just to check. The swampy area is still there, though they've cleared away some of the trees for a new development. Whatever rose from the ground that day has never shown itself to me again. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else has ever seen them. Maybe someone else was waiting at that bus stop on another foggy morning and witnessed the same thing, but like me, was too afraid of sounding crazy to tell anyone. All I know is that on that autumn morning in Atherton, for about 15 minutes, I saw something impossible. And whether those tentacles were something from another dimension, or some unknown creature, or something else entirely, they were there. They were real. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I still wonder what would have happened if I'd walked closer to them that morning instead of running to find that family. Maybe it's better that I never found out. I've been hunting most of my life. Started when I was maybe 12 with my dad, and I'm 34 now. I know the Georgia swamps better than I know the layout of my own apartment. I've seen weird stuff out there before, coyotes acting strange, odd lights at dusk, even came across what might have been a meth lab once, didn't stick around to confirm that one. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened last November. This was November 12th of last year, 2022. Perfect hunting weather, cool but not freezing, clear skies, just the kind of morning you pray for during deer season. My girlfriend C and I had planned this trip for weeks. She's relatively new to hunting, but catches on quick and loves being outdoors almost as much as I do. We arrived at our spot around 4:30 a.m. This was a section of public land about 2 hours south of Atlanta. Remote doesn't begin to describe it. The kind of place where your cell phone is just a fancy flashlight. I'd hunted there maybe 3 or 4 times before, always with decent luck. The area is thick with cypress and oak, has a few small creeks running through it, and backs up to a larger swamp. Perfect deer habitat. We geared up in silence like always. I had my Winchester .308, trusty rifle I've used for years, and C had her Remington 700. After checking our packs and making sure we had everything, we split up to our different stands. Hers was about 400 yards west of mine, overlooking a small clearing where we'd seen deer activity before. I took the eastern stand near the edge where the woods meet the swamp. We had our walkie-talkies, agreed to check in at noon, and headed our separate ways. By 5:15 a.m., I was settled in my tree stand, about 15 feet up. The darkness was still complete, that special kind of dark you only get far from city lights. I could barely see my hand in front of my face. I just sat there, letting my eyes adjust, listening to the night sounds. Except there weren't many. That should have been my first warning. Usually, even in the dark, there's something. Frogs, insects, the occasional owl. But it was dead quiet. I chalked it up to the season and temperature, maybe animals already bedding down for winter. I didn't think much of it then. As the sky began to lighten around 6:30, I expected the woods to come alive like they always do. That morning chorus when birds start chirping, squirrels begin rustling, and everything seems to wake up at once. It's one of my favorite parts of hunting, that transition from night to day. But it never happened. The light came, but the sounds didn't. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. By Seventure, the woods were light enough to see clearly, but I hadn't heard a single natural sound, just the occasional breeze moving through the cypress. The silence was so complete it felt physical, like pressure on my ears. I remember thinking it was weird, but not necessarily alarming. Sometimes wildlife just has off days. Then I heard it. Around 7:30, a sound came from what I guessed was maybe half a mile deeper into the swamp. It was like nothing I've ever heard before or since. The closest I can describe it is if you combined a bull elk's bugle with the scream of a woman in pain, but deeper, more guttural. It lasted maybe 5 seconds, then stopped. My first thought, wild hog. They can make some ungodly sounds when fighting or mating. But even as I tried to rationalize it, I knew that wasn't right. This sound was too deliberate, too structured, almost like it was trying to communicate something. I checked my walkie to call C, but stopped myself. No need to spook her over what was probably just some weird animal sound. So I sat there, rifle across my lap, scanning the woods with my binoculars. Nothing moved. About 30 minutes later, I heard my name, Gideon. It was so clear, so distinct, I actually turned around in my stand. It sounded exactly like C's voice, coming from directly behind me. But there was nothing there, just the trunk of the oak I was perched in. "C?" I whispered into my walkie. "You leave your stand?" After a few seconds of static, she responded, "No, I'm still here. Saw a small doe about 10 minutes ago, but she spooked." "Why?" I didn't want to alarm her, so I just said, "Nothing, thought I heard something, stay put." I tried to focus back on hunting, but my heart was pounding now. I know what I heard. It was C's voice, clear as day, saying my name right behind me. But she was hundreds of yards away. Then the footsteps started. They were coming from the direction of the swamp, slow and deliberate. Heavy enough to snap twigs and rustle leaves, but not crashing like a deer or hog would. More measured. The hair on my neck stood up. Whatever was making those footsteps was big, and it wasn't moving like any animal I knew. I raised my binoculars and scanned in the direction of the sound. At first, nothing. Then movement. About 100 yards away, partially obscured by a cypress, I saw what I initially thought was a deer. The general shape and size seemed right, maybe a large buck based on the outline. I felt a rush of relief. Just a deer. The weird sound earlier must have been unrelated. I set down my binoculars and picked up my rifle, looking through the scope for a better view. What I saw through that scope still haunts me. It wasn't a deer, not even close. The thing was standing still now, and I could see it clearly. It was vaguely deer-like in its basic shape, but everything else was wrong, horribly wrong. It was emaciated with its skin, if you could call it that, stretched tight over a skeletal frame. The color was what hit me first, a pale lavender, almost like bruised flesh. Not brown, not gray, but this sickly purple hue that doesn't exist in nature. Its head was the worst part. It had antlers, but they weren't like deer antlers. They were more like an elk's, but twisted and asymmetrical, with too many points going in unnatural directions. Some curved back toward its skull, others jutted out at impossible angles. And its face, God, its face. The snout was too long, too pointed. Its eyes were huge, bulging, and completely black, like holes punched into its head. And its mouth, it seemed to extend too far along its jaw like a permanent, exaggerated grin. I must have made a noise, a gasp or something, because suddenly those black eyes swung directly toward me. It couldn't have seen me from that distance, not with my camo and my position in the tree, but it knew exactly where I was. It stared directly at me for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. Then it did something that made my blood turn to ice. It stood up on its hind legs, like a person. Standing, it must have been 7 feet tall at least. Its front legs, arms, hung down by its sides, too long, with too many joints. Its chest expanded as it took in air, and then it opened that terrible mouth and let out the same scream I'd heard earlier, but louder now, so loud it physically hurt my ears. And then it charged. I've seen deer run. I've seen bears run. Hell, I've seen a moose charge once on a trip to Maine. Nothing moves like this thing moved. It didn't bound like a deer or lumber like a bear. It ran in this horrible fluid motion, like its joints didn't work the way joints should. It covered ground so fast it was almost a blur, knocking down small trees and brush like they weren't even there. Pure instinct took over. I raised my rifle and fired. Clean shot, right where the chest would be on a normal animal. I'm a good shot, have been all my life. I know I hit it. I know I did. It didn't even flinch, didn't slow down, didn't react at all, just kept coming. I chambered another round and fired again and again. 3 shots total, all center mass. It should have dropped anything living. It had 0 effect. By now, it was maybe 50 yards away and closing fast. I had nowhere to go. I was 15 feet up a tree. In the split second I had to decide, I chose to get down rather than be trapped up there. I slung my rifle over my shoulder and practically fell down the climbing sticks, scraping my hands raw in the process. The moment my feet hit the ground, I bolted toward where C was posted. I've never run so fast in my life. Branches whipped my face. I tripped over roots, but I didn't stop. I could hear it behind me, that unnatural movement through the underbrush, those footsteps that didn't sound quite right. Then, suddenly, silence. The crashing pursuit just stopped. I didn't. I kept running until my lungs burned, until I reached the general area where C's stand should be. I was disoriented, panicked, and it took me precious minutes to locate her exact tree. "C," I called up, no longer caring about scaring away game. "We need to go, now." She looked down at me, confused but alert enough to sense my panic. She didn't argue, just quickly gathered her gear and descended. "What happened? Did you see something?" she asked once she was on the ground. "Later," was all I could manage. "We need to get back to the truck." We moved quickly through the woods, me constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every sound. C kept asking questions, but I just shook my head and kept moving. I couldn't explain what I'd seen. Not yet, maybe not ever. When we finally reached the truck, I threw our gear in the bed and had the engine started before C even closed her door. I peeled out of there, spraying gravel, driving way too fast on those narrow dirt roads. Once we hit the highway, C put her hand on my arm. I was shaking. "Gideon, you're scaring me. What happened back there?" I glanced at her. "Did you hear anything weird this morning? Any strange sounds?" She shook her head. "No, it was actually super quiet. Barely heard anything until that doe showed up." "You didn't hear a scream? Like a really loud, weird scream?" "No, nothing like that." "And you never left your stand? Never came over to mine?" "Of course not. I was in my stand the whole time until you came running up like the devil was chasing you." I just nodded, focusing on the road. How could she not have heard that scream? It was loud enough to echo through the whole forest. "Did you say my name at any point? Over the walkie, maybe?" She was getting more concerned now. "No, Gideon, only when you radioed me asking if I'd left my stand. What's going on?" I told her everything then, about the silence, the scream, hearing her voice, seeing that thing. As I described it, I could see she didn't believe me. Not really. She thought I'd spooked myself. maybe seen a deformed deer or a bear with mange. She suggested I might have been having some kind of weird reaction to something. Maybe those mushrooms we'd seen growing near my stand had spores that caused hallucinations. I didn't argue with her. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had imagined it all, or exaggerated a normal animal sighting into something monstrous. That would be the rational explanation. Except I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and I know my bullets hit that thing and did absolutely nothing. Later that day, after we'd gotten home and I'd calmed down somewhat, I tried researching online. I looked up folklore about Georgia swamps, indigenous legends, cryptid sightings, anything that might explain what I'd encountered. I found some vague mentions of deer men in Native American legends and stories about skinwalkers from various traditions, but nothing that perfectly matched what I saw. The closest I came was a few obscure forum posts from hunters in the southeastern states describing encounters with pale, deer-like creatures that seemed wrong somehow. Most were quickly dismissed as hoaxes or misidentifications. Maybe they were, or maybe those hunters saw what I saw and, like me, found themselves unable to fully explain it. It's been almost a year now. I've been back hunting many times since then. Different spots, different counties even. I'm not letting one experience, however terrifying, rob me of something I love. But I've never gone back to that particular area. I never will. C and I are still together, though she still thinks I either hallucinated or exaggerated what happened. Sometimes I almost convince myself she's right. Almost. But then I'll wake up in the middle of the night, hearing that scream in my dreams. Or I'll be out in the woods at dawn, waiting for the morning chorus of birds and wildlife. And for a heart-stopping moment, the silence will seem too complete, too unnatural. And I'll remember those black, knowing eyes staring directly at me from 100 yards away. I'll remember how it stood up, how it moved, how my bullets did nothing. And I'll wonder if, somewhere in the Georgia swamps, that thing is still out there, waiting. I still can't explain what happened during last year's elk hunting trip. I've been hunting my whole life, been in those mountains more times than I can count, but I've never experienced anything like this before. Writing this down makes my hands shake all over again. It was early November, prime elk season in eastern Oregon. My dad, Grandpa, and I had been planning this trip for months. I was 17. It was my third hunting season with my own tag, and I was beyond excited to get away from school drama and just be in the woods with my family. We arrived at our usual spot Thursday afternoon, a secluded clearing about 12 miles from the nearest paved road. The area's pretty remote, all dirt roads and pine forest as far as you can see. My grandpa's been hunting this same spot since the 70s, knows it like the back of his hand. Or at least I thought he did. After setting up camp, my dad wanted to take the truck and do some evening scouting before dark. Grandpa stayed behind to rest his knee. He'd had surgery earlier that year, so it was just me and Dad driving the logging roads, checking game trails and looking for fresh sign. We were about 4 miles from camp when we came across something weird. There was this section of forest, maybe half an acre, completely fenced off with this old, rusted chain-link fence. The weird part was the fence looked ancient, all twisted and falling apart in places, but there was nothing inside it, no building foundation, no equipment, nothing, just trees and brush like the rest of the forest. Dad said he'd never noticed it before, which was strange since we've hunted this area for years. Probably some old Forest Service thing, he said, but he looked uneasy. As we were driving away, I swear I heard this sound, like someone calling out. It was faint, almost lost in the wind through the trees, but it made the hair on my arms stand up. Dad didn't react, so I figured it was just my imagination or the wind. Looking back, I wish I'd said something. We got back to camp around dusk. Grandpa had a fire going and was cooking up some chili. We ate, talked about our plan for morning, and crashed early. Normal hunting trip stuff. But I remember having these weird dreams that night. Couldn't really remember them when I woke up, just fragments of being watched by something in the dark. The next morning, we were up well before dawn. My dad's one of those hunters who believes if you're not sitting in your spot at least an hour before sunrise, you're doing it wrong. It was freezing cold, probably mid-20s, and completely dark as we hiked out from camp. We had our headlamps but kept them dim to avoid spooking game. Grandpa was moving slower than usual because of his knee, but he refused to stay behind. We reached our hunting spot about 45 minutes before sunrise, a small ridge overlooking a clearing where we'd seen elk in previous years. As the sky slowly lightened, I could make out a small group of deer at the far edge of the clearing, but no elk. Still, it was peaceful, just sitting there as the forest woke up. Birds started chirping, squirrels rustling in the leaves, normal forest sounds. Around 9 a.m., I got hungry and dug into my backpack for some beef jerky I'd packed. The moment I opened that package, everything went dead silent. Not gradually, but all at once, like someone had hit a mute button on the entire forest. Even the wind seemed to stop. I looked at my dad and Grandpa, and they noticed it too. Dad put his finger to his lips, thinking maybe there was an elk nearby that we couldn't see. But it wasn't just quiet, it was wrong. I felt like something was watching us. Not like an animal watches you, but like, I don't know how to explain it. Like something was studying us. I'd felt that sensation before when we'd had a mountain lion stalking us a couple years back. But this was different, more intense, more deliberate. After about 5 minutes of this unnatural silence, the normal forest sounds gradually returned. Dad whispered that maybe it was a predator passing through, a bear or cougar, and the other animals had sensed it. That made sense, but it didn't explain the heavy feeling of being watched that I couldn't shake. We stayed in that spot until about 2 p.m. without seeing any elk. Grandpa's knee was bothering him. So we decided to head back to camp for a late lunch, then try a different spot in the evening. The walk back was uneventful, and I started to relax a bit. We spent the afternoon at camp, resting and preparing for the evening hunt. Around 4 p.m., we headed out to a different location, a small meadow about a mile west of camp. As the sun began to set, the temperature dropped fast. I remember checking my watch at 5:43 p.m. It was already getting dark, and I was thinking we should head back soon. That's when I heard it. "Milo, come here. I have something for you." It was my girlfriend's voice, not similar, exactly her voice, with that same little nickname she always uses for me. But my girlfriend, Kyla, was back home, 200 miles away. There's no cell service out there, and even if there was, how would she know where I was in these woods? I froze. My dad and Grandpa were about 30 yards to my right, glassing the meadow edge, and couldn't have heard it. The voice came from behind me, back in the thicker trees, maybe 50 yards away. I turned slowly, scanning the darkening forest, but couldn't see anything unusual. "Dad?" I whispered, loud enough for him to hear me. He looked over, and I motioned for him to come over. As he was making his way toward me, I heard it again. "Come here, babe. I won't hurt you." Same voice, same inflection, exactly like Kyla talks. But there was something off about it, like it was trying too hard to sound natural, and the phrasing was weird. "I won't hurt you." Why would Kyla ever say that? By the time my dad reached me, I was shaking. I told him what I heard, and he immediately looked concerned. "There's nobody else out here, Max," he said quietly. "We're miles from the nearest road." "I know that," I whispered back, but I heard Kyla's voice, clear as day. Dad signaled to Grandpa, who made his way over. As we stood there whispering, the forest went silent again, that same unnatural quiet from the morning. Dad unholstered his sidearm. He always carries a Glock while hunting, just in case. Grandpa, who'd been hunting these woods for decades, looked more unsettled than I'd ever seen him. "We're leaving now," Dad said. No debate. We started making our way back toward camp, moving faster than you normally would while hunting. The silence persisted, broken only by our footsteps on the forest floor. The light was fading fast, and I kept looking back over my shoulder, expecting to see something. But there was nothing visible, just trees and shadows. About halfway back to camp, I heard the voice again, this time from off to our left. "Max, please, I need you." It was pleading now, with a hint of desperation that sounded so much like Kyla it made my stomach twist. I grabbed my dad's arm and pointed in the direction it came from. He nodded. He'd heard it too this time. "Keep moving," he whispered. "Don't look at it. Don't look at it. Not don't look at her or don't look that way." It, like he knew whatever was making that voice wasn't human. We picked up our pace, almost jogging now. The voice called out twice more, each time from a different direction, like it was circling us. The last time, it dropped the pretense completely. "Max," it called. And though it still used Kyla's voice, the way it stretched out my name wasn't human at all. It was like someone trying to play a record at the wrong speed, recognizable but distorted in a way that made my skin crawl. We practically ran the last quarter-mile to camp. Once we reached the clearing, Dad immediately started the campfire up bigger, while Grandpa got the Coleman lanterns going. None of us said much as we huddled around the fire, listening. The normal sounds of the forest had returned, crickets, an occasional owl, but that feeling of being watched remained. After about an hour of sitting in tense silence, Grandpa finally spoke up. "I've heard stories," he said quietly. "Old stories from when I used to hunt with your great-uncle Bill, about things in these mountains that can sound like people you know." "What things?" I asked. Grandpa shook his head. The old-timers never would say exactly. Called them skinwalkers sometimes, but that's not right. Those are from Navajo country. Whatever's up here is something else, something local. "You're scaring the boy, Dad," my father said, but I could tell he was shaken too. "He needs to know," Grandpa insisted. "This is why I never let you two hunt alone out here, why we always stay together. I thought it was just stories, but—" He trailed off, poking at the fire with a stick. We stayed up late that night, taking turns keeping watch. Nothing approached our camp, at least nothing we could see, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was just beyond the firelight, waiting, watching. When morning came, Dad decided we were packing up and leaving. 3 days early. Grandpa didn't argue, which told me everything I needed to know about how serious this was. If my grandfather, the most stubborn man I know, was willing to cut a hunting trip short, then whatever was out there was real, and it was dangerous. As we were breaking down camp, I remembered that fenced-off section of forest we'd seen the day before. I asked Grandpa if he knew anything about it. "What fence?" he asked, frowning. I described it. The old chain-link fence surrounding a random patch of forest about 4 miles from our camp. Grandpa and Dad exchanged a look I couldn't interpret. "There's no fence out there, Max," Dad said slowly. We've been hunting this area for 20 years. There's no fenced area anywhere around here. But we saw it, I insisted. Yesterday when we were scouting, you even commented on it. Dad shook his head. I don't remember that at all. I would have thought I was going crazy, except for what happened next. As we were loading the last of our gear into the truck, I glanced toward the tree line and saw something that made my blood run cold. There, partly hidden among the trees at the edge of our campsite, was a figure. It was mostly hidden in shadow, but I could make out what looked like a person, standing perfectly still, watching us. As I stared, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, it slowly raised one arm and waved, a gentle, almost friendly gesture. Dad, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Look. He turned, following my gaze. The figure remained still for a moment, then stepped backward into the deeper shadows and was gone. Did you see it? I asked. Dad nodded slowly. Yeah, I saw it. What was it? He didn't answer, just hurried us into the truck. We drove out of there faster than was probably safe on those logging roads, not slowing down until we hit pavement. It's been almost a year now, and I still don't know what happened out there. I've researched all kinds of forest phenomena and Native American legends from that region, but nothing quite matches what we experienced. Dad refuses to talk about it. Grandpa just says some things in this world weren't meant to be understood. Whatever it was, it knew Kyla's voice perfectly. It knew what she calls me. And sometimes, when I'm on the phone with her late at night, I find myself listening just a little more carefully to her voice, making sure it's really her. Because whatever was out in those woods, it's still there. And I can't shake the feeling that somehow it's still watching me. I still don't know what to make of what happened to me 6 months ago. I've hesitated to share this because people will either think I'm crazy or just making it up. But after hearing what happened to Mike, I can't keep quiet anymore. Maybe writing this down will help me process everything. I work, or rather worked, as a field technician for mountain communications in Colorado. My job was pretty straightforward: drive to remote relay stations and cell towers across the Rockies, perform maintenance, fix outages, and make sure everything kept running. I actually enjoyed the solitude of those drives and the peaceful work at sites where the only sounds were wind and occasional wildlife. Most locations were pretty standard: a small clearing with a fence, some equipment boxes, maybe a small shed or tower. Nothing exciting, just routine work that paid the bills. Until that day in late October, when my manager Frank called me into his office. Sherman, I need you to head out to site RG-147 today. It's showing some connectivity issues, and it's a priority client, Frank said, sliding a work order across his desk. You know where Dead Man's Gulch is, right? I'd heard of it, but never been there. It was one of our most remote sites, about 3 hours from the office, tucked deep into the mountains. The name came from some old mining accident in the 1800s, where several men died in a cave-in. Sure, no problem, I replied, even though I felt a slight unease as soon as he mentioned the place. What exactly needs to be done? Signal degradation and some power fluctuations. Probably just wildlife damage to the cables or maybe storm damage from last week. Should be pretty routine. Frank gave me the access codes and directions, then added almost as an afterthought, try to get back before dark. Those mountain roads can be tricky at night, especially with the weather turning. I grabbed my tools, loaded up my company truck, and headed out. The first 2 hours of the drive were normal. Highways and county roads I'd traveled many times. But as I turned onto the unmarked dirt road that would take me the final stretch, everything changed. The trees grew denser, blocking most of the sunlight. The road narrowed and deteriorated, with ruts so deep I had to slow to a crawl in some places. After about 30 minutes on this road, I came to a rusty metal gate that stood open. A faded "No Trespassing" sign hung loosely from one side, swinging slightly in the breeze. This wasn't unusual for remote sites. Most had some kind of access control, but something about this particular gate made me pause. It seemed forgotten, like no one had passed through in years, despite the fact that someone from our company should visit at least quarterly for maintenance. I drove through and continued another 15 minutes up a winding path that barely qualified as a road. The trees pressed in from both sides, branches occasionally scraping against my truck. I finally reached a small clearing where our relay station stood, a fenced area about 30 by 30 feet, containing a small equipment shelter, a backup generator, and a 50-foot communications tower. The first thing I noticed was that the security fence was unlocked and slightly ajar. This was definitely not normal protocol. These sites were supposed to remain locked at all times, and only company technicians had the combination. I made a mental note to report this to Frank when I got back. I parked my truck about 10 feet from the gate, grabbed my tools and laptop, and entered the enclosure. The equipment shelter was a simple metal shed, about the size of a garden shed. Inside was the usual array of servers, junction boxes, and cable assemblies. I found the main control panel and hooked up my diagnostic equipment. Everything seemed normal at first. The power readings were stable and the connections looked intact. But as I ran deeper diagnostics, I started to notice strange patterns in the data flow. Brief interruptions that would self-correct, almost like something was momentarily interfering with the signal. I was focused on troubleshooting when I first got the feeling I was being watched. You know that prickly sensation on the back of your neck? I turned around quickly, half expecting to see someone standing in the doorway, but there was no one there, just the empty clearing and my truck parked where I'd left it. Wait, was my truck in the same spot? I could have sworn I'd parked it closer to the gate. I shook my head, trying to focus on the job. I must be imagining things. I went back to work, replacing a few worn cables and recalibrating some settings. The whole time, that feeling of being watched never went away. I kept glancing out the small window of the shelter, but never saw anything besides trees swaying in the wind. After about 2 hours, I had fixed everything I could identify. The diagnostics were now showing normal readings, and the connection seemed stable. I packed up my equipment and stepped outside, locking the shelter behind me. That's when I noticed it. My truck had definitely moved. Not by much, maybe 5 or 10 feet, but I was absolutely certain I hadn't parked it where it now stood. And the driver's side door, which I always keep closed, was slightly open. My heart started racing. I scanned the clearing and the surrounding tree line, but saw nothing unusual. No other vehicles, no people, just the wind rustling through the pines. I approached my truck cautiously, looking for signs that someone else had been there. That's when I spotted the footprints in the soft dirt around the perimeter of the site. Small, barefoot prints that seemed to circle the entire enclosure. They were too small to be an adult's, maybe a child's or a teenager's. But who would be out here, barefoot, in late October when the temperature was barely above 40 degrees? I quickly took photos of the prints with my phone, then hurried to finish my work, securing the equipment shelter and locking the fence gate behind me. I just wanted to get out of there. When I returned to my truck, I froze. The driver's door was now wide open. I had closed it after checking for signs of tampering. I'm absolutely certain of that, and now it was open again. I approached slowly, my hand instinctively moving to the small pocket knife I keep in my jeans. Not much protection, but it was all I had. The truck appeared empty. My tools were still in the back where I'd left them. Nothing seemed to be missing. I got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. The digital clock on the dashboard read 3:47 p.m. I had plenty of time to make it back before dark. I put the truck in gear and headed down the rutted path toward the main gate. When I reached the gate, my stomach dropped. It was closed, and not just closed, it was secured with a heavy chain and padlock that hadn't been there when I arrived. I sat in my truck, staring at the gate, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Had someone come and locked it while I was working? But I hadn't heard any vehicles, and there were no fresh tire tracks besides my own. I got out and examined the chain. It was old and rusty, matching the gate, like it had been there for years. But I know it wasn't there when I drove in. I tugged at it, hoping it might be loose enough to slip off. But it was secure. That's when I heard it. Whispering. Soft voices coming from the woods around me. I couldn't make out any words, just the hushed sounds of multiple voices. They seemed to be saying I shouldn't be there, that I needed to leave. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is someone there? I'm just a technician doing maintenance work." The whispering stopped immediately. The silence that followed was somehow worse. I hurried back to my truck, my hands shaking as I reached for the door handle. It wouldn't open. The door was locked, with my keys clearly visible in the ignition where I'd left them in my panic. Shit, I muttered, looking around frantically. That's when I saw it, a small, muddy handprint on the driver's side window. A child's handprint, but the mud had a strange reddish tint to it that made my skin crawl. Thankfully, I remembered the magnetic spare key box under the rear bumper. I crouched down, keeping my eyes on the surrounding woods, and felt for the box. It was still there. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the lock. Once inside, I locked the doors immediately and started the engine. I couldn't wait to break the chain. I needed to get out now. I put the truck in drive, backed up about 30 feet, then floored it toward the gate. The truck hit the chain with enough force to snap it, though the impact left a decent dent in my front bumper. I didn't care about the damage. I just kept driving, going faster than was safe on that narrow, rutted road. The whole time, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see someone or something following me. About a mile from the main road, I had to slow down for a sharp curve. As I did, I noticed something hanging from my side mirror that hadn't been there before. Some kind of small bundle made of twigs tied together with what looked like dirty cloth strips. I pulled over, got out, keeping the engine running, and used a stick to knock it off the mirror. It fell to the ground with a soft thud. I didn't touch it. I just got back in my truck and drove away as fast as I could. By the time I reached the main road, the sun was already starting to set behind the mountains. I drove straight back to the office, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they cramped up. When I arrived, Frank was still there, finishing up some paperwork. He looked surprised to see me in such a state. "Sherman, everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I told him everything. The unlocked gate, the moved truck, the footprints, the whispering, the handprint, the bundle on my mirror. As I spoke, his expression changed from concern to skepticism. "Look," he said when I finished. "That area has a few mountain hermits, maybe some squatters in the old mining cabins. They probably saw your company truck and got curious. Some of them don't like outsiders much. Frank, these weren't just curious hermits. Something seriously wrong is going on up there." He sighed. I'll send a security team to check it out next week. But honestly, it sounds like you just spooked yourself. Those remote sites can play tricks on your mind when you're alone up there." I knew he didn't believe me. I wouldn't have believed it myself if I hadn't experienced it. I submitted my report, including the photos of the footprints, and went home. I barely slept that night, or for several nights after. A month later, another technician named Mike was sent to the same site. Mike didn't return that evening. Search and rescue found his abandoned truck the next day, parked near that same rusty gate. The gate was open, the chain I'd broken nowhere to be seen. Of Mike, they found nothing. No footprints, no signs of struggle, nothing. It was like he had simply vanished. I quit my job a week later and moved to another state. I couldn't stay, knowing what might be out there. I still have nightmares about those whispering voices and that small reddish handprint on my window, and I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't had that spare key, if I hadn't been able to get away. Sometimes I think about that bundle of twigs I knocked off my mirror. Was it some kind of marker? A tracking device of sorts? Whatever lurks in Dead Man's Gulch, I'm convinced it killed Mike to protect its territory. And I'm convinced it would have killed me too if I'd stayed any longer. It started last summer when my buddy Barney asked if I'd take him and his new wife Shelby on a hiking trip as a wedding gift. They wanted to bring some friends from their wedding party too, Cassie and Gabe, who were dating, and Ryan and Sophie, who'd been friends since college. I was happy to do it. I knew a beautiful route that wasn't on the typical tourist maps, something I'd scouted earlier that spring. It had these amazing vistas and a couple of pristine alpine lakes that most people never get to see. We set out on a Tuesday morning in early August. Perfect weather, not too hot, clear skies. Everyone was in good spirits, laughing and taking pictures. Barney kept making these terrible dad jokes that somehow got funnier the higher we climbed. I remember feeling proud showing them this little slice of wilderness I'd found. The first couple days were exactly what I'd hoped for. We made good time, set up camp in these picture-perfect spots, and sat around the fire at night sharing stories. But on the third day, something felt off. I noticed it first when we stopped for lunch near this little stream. The forest was quiet, not peaceful quiet, but empty quiet. I've spent enough time in these mountains to know there's always background noise. Birds, insects, small animals rustling around. But there was nothing. I didn't mention it to the others. No need to worry them over what was probably nothing. That afternoon, we came across these footprints in a muddy section of the trail. At first, I thought maybe a bear had passed through, but looking closer, they were distinctly foot-shaped. Human-like, but massive. Much bigger than any boot print I'd ever seen. Barney noticed them too and called everyone over. "Holy shit, Jack. Is that what I think it is?" he asked, crouching down beside one. "Probably just some guy with big feet," I said, but I didn't really believe it. The stride length between prints was huge, and there was something about the depth of the impression that suggested serious weight. Sophie took photos while Ryan made jokes about Bigfoot, but I could tell everyone was a little unsettled. We pushed on and made camp about 2 miles further up. That night, as we sat around the fire, Shelby suddenly went quiet and grabbed Barney's arm. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. We all went silent. At first I heard nothing. Then there was a distinct snap of branches breaking somewhere in the darkness beyond our camp. Could have been anything, a deer, an elk. But it sounded heavy, deliberate. I slept with my hunting knife that night, something I hadn't done in years. The fourth day started with a misty morning. We packed up quickly and hit the trail. About an hour in, we found more footprints, fresher this time. They crossed our path and seemed to follow a parallel route to ours. Sophie stopped suddenly and pointed through a gap in the trees. "There's someone over there," she said. "I just saw movement." We all stared in the direction she was pointing, but I couldn't see anything through the dense trees. "Maybe a deer?" Gabe suggested. Sophie shook her head. "It was upright, walking." The mood changed after that. The joking stopped. Everyone stuck closer together, and I noticed Ryan constantly looking over his shoulder. Cassie asked if we could turn back, but we were already 4 days into a 7-day route. Going forward was actually faster than backtracking at this point, or so I told myself. That night at camp, the tension was palpable. We barely talked as we ate dinner. I tried to keep things normal, telling stories about previous trips, but nobody was really listening. They were all focused on the darkness beyond our fire. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of something heavy moving around our camp. Slow, methodical footsteps circling just beyond where our light reached. I lay perfectly still in my tent, listening as it made a complete circuit around us, then disappeared back into the forest. I didn't sleep again that night, and judging by everyone's faces in the morning, neither did they. The 5th day is when everything went to hell. We were crossing this beautiful open meadow around midday. The sun was out, and for a moment, it felt like the tension of the previous night had lifted. Then Gabe stopped dead in his tracks and pointed toward the tree line about 200 yards away. "What the fuck is that?" he whispered. We all turned to look. At first, I thought it was a shadow or a burnt tree trunk, but then it moved. It was massive, standing upright at the edge of the forest, covered in what looked like dark, matted fur. Even from that distance, I could tell it was much larger than a person. We all froze watching it. It seemed to be watching us too. After what felt like forever, it turned and moved back into the trees, disappearing from view. No one said anything for a long time. Finally, Ryan broke the silence. "Tell me that wasn't what I think it was." I didn't answer. I couldn't process what I'd just seen. It didn't make sense. I'd been in these mountains for most of my adult life and never seen anything like that. "We need to go back," Shelby said, her voice shaking. "Jack, we need to go back now." I agreed, but not by backtracking. I knew another route down that would take us in a different direction from where we'd just seen. Whatever that was. It would add an extra day to our journey, but it felt safer than potentially crossing paths with that thing again. We changed course immediately. Everyone was on edge, moving quickly and talking in whispers if they talked at all. We pushed hard, trying to cover as much ground as possible before dark. When we finally had to stop and make camp, no one wanted to. Cassie was nearly in tears at the thought of spending another night out there. I picked a spot that was somewhat defensible, a small clearing with a rock face at our backs. We set up the tents close together and built a bigger fire than usual. No one mentioned what we'd seen, but it was all any of us were thinking about. As darkness fell, the woods around us went silent again. That unnatural emptiness that I'd noticed days earlier seemed even more profound now. We sat around the fire, jumping at every sound. Around 9 p.m. we heard it, heavy footsteps moving through the forest, not just from one direction but from several. Low grunt-like sounds came from the darkness. "There's more than one," Gabe whispered, his face pale in the firelight. Suddenly, a large rock crashed into our campsite, missing Ryan's head by inches. Then another from a different direction. They were throwing rocks at us. "We need to go now," I said, grabbing my pack. "Leave the tents. Just take what you need and move." We grabbed our essentials and fled into the night. I had a headlamp and my GPS, enough to navigate us down the mountain in the dark. It was dangerous as hell, but not as dangerous as staying. As we rushed down the trail, I heard them moving parallel to us in the woods, keeping pace. Sophie stumbled and fell, cutting her hand on a rock. The moment her blood hit the ground, the movement in the woods intensified. They were getting closer. We came around a bend in the trail, and there it was, standing directly in our path about 50 feet ahead. In the beam of my headlamp, I got my first clear look at it. It must have been 9 feet tall, with broad shoulders and unnaturally long arms. Its face was almost human-like but flatter, with a pronounced brow ridge. The eyes reflected the light like a deer's would. We all stopped cold. No one breathed. It let out this deep, resonant yell that I felt in my chest more than heard with my ears. Then, as if to demonstrate its strength, it reached over and pushed against a nearby tree, a good-sized pine, maybe 8 inches in diameter, and snapped it like it was nothing. I slowly raised my hands in a non-threatening gesture and began to back us up. It watched, but didn't advance. Once we were around the bend and out of its sight, we turned and moved as quickly and quietly as possible in another direction. We hiked through the entire night, stumbling, sometimes crawling down steep sections in the dark. No one complained. No one asked to rest. We just moved, driven by raw fear. As dawn broke, we finally reached a Forest Service road, and the relief was overwhelming. Sophie broke down crying. Ryan just sat on the ground, staring back up at the mountain with this haunted look. We hitched a ride with a ranger to the nearest station and reported what happened. The ranger looked at us like we were nuts or on drugs. He took our statement but made it clear he thought we were either mistaken or making it up. That was 6 months ago. I still guide trips in the Cascades, but I don't use that route anymore. In fact, I stay far away from that whole section of the mountains. Call it respect for territorial boundaries. Call it trauma. I don't care. Barney, Shelby, and the others, they're convinced we encountered Bigfoot. I don't know what to think. I've spent my whole adult life in these mountains and never believed those stories. Now, I don't know what I believe anymore. I just know there's something up there that defies explanation. Something that watched us, stalked us, and ultimately let us go. I still dream about those eyes reflecting in my headlamp. I still wake up hearing that guttural yell. And even now, sitting in my apartment miles from those mountains, I sometimes catch myself listening for heavy footsteps circling in the darkness. I can't really talk about this with my wife or friends. I've started to think maybe I just need to get this out in the open, even if it's anonymously. Maybe someone out there has seen the same thing, and I won't feel so alone in this. I worked as a police officer for 5 years in a small town in rural Pennsylvania. Most nights were uneventful. Drunk drivers, domestic disputes, teenagers causing trouble. Standard stuff. Nothing prepared me for what happened during my last year on the force. It was early November, and I was working the graveyard shift as usual. The weather had turned cold, but there wasn't any snow yet. Just that bitter chill that cuts through your uniform. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and by around 4 in the morning, things would usually die down completely. That's when I'd find a quiet spot to park and catch up on paperwork, maybe grab a quick coffee from my thermos. I had this spot I liked, Cypress Hill Cemetery. I know it sounds creepy, but it was peaceful. Small place, maybe 50 headstones total, surrounded by woods and set back from the main road by about half a mile of gravel driveway. No street lights, no traffic, and the dispatcher rarely bothered me when I was there because it wasn't exactly on my patrol route. The cemetery sat on elevated ground that gave me a good view of the valley so I could spot any cars coming from a distance. That night started like any other. I pulled into the cemetery around 4:15 a.m. The moon was nearly full, which gave everything this pale blue glow. I parked facing the exit, habit from police training, always have an escape route. I remember turning the engine off, but keeping the battery on so I could listen to the radio at low volume. Just some late-night talk show to keep me company. I'd been sitting there for about an hour. My paperwork was done, and I was just waiting for my shift to end. I remember checking my watch. 5:23 a.m. The sky was still completely dark. That's when I noticed some movement by one of the older graves toward the back of the cemetery, maybe 50 yards from my cruiser. At first I figured it was a deer or maybe a bear. We get black bears in the area sometimes, especially in fall when they're fattening up for winter. I didn't think much of it until I saw more deliberate movement. Something was digging. I reached for my spotlight mounted next to my driver's side window and swung it toward the movement. When the light hit whatever was there, I initially thought I was right about the bear. There was something large, dark, and hunched over one of the graves. But as soon as the light touched it, it stopped moving. That's when I realized something was very wrong. This thing, it wasn't a bear. The proportions were all wrong. Its back was too long, its limbs too thin yet somehow muscular. It had patchy dark fur. But where the fur was missing, its skin almost glowed pale bluish-white in the moonlight. And it was definitely digging at one of the graves. There was dirt scattered all around it. I froze with my hand still on the spotlight. Part of me wanted to radio this in, but what would I even say? I couldn't process what I was seeing. Then it turned its head, just the head. The body stayed perfectly still, hunched over the grave, but the head rotated toward me in a way that no animal's neck should bend. No person's neck either. It was like watching something with a broken hinge. The spotlight caught its face, and that's when real fear hit me. Its eyes were enormous, way too big for its head, and completely black. Not dark brown like a bear's, pure glossy black, like polished obsidian. They reflected my spotlight like mirrors. It had a snout, but not quite like any animal I recognized. Too long, too pointed, with what looked like rows of teeth slightly exposed. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. My training kicked in, and I reached for my radio, but before I could call it in, the thing stood up. When it rose to its hind legs, I realized how tall it was, easily 7 feet, maybe more. Its arms hung down almost to the ground, ending in what looked like hands, not paws. Hands with too many joints in the fingers. Then it started walking toward me. It didn't move like a bear or any animal I'd ever seen. It walked with this strange grace, almost like a ballet dancer, too smooth and controlled. Each step was deliberate, silent. Its head remained fixed on me the entire time, those black eyes never blinking. I'd like to say I reacted like a trained officer, but the truth is, I panicked. I fumbled with the keys still in the ignition, dropped them onto the floor, and had to feel around for them while keeping my eyes on that thing. It was getting closer, maybe 30 yards away now. When I finally got the key, I cranked the engine so hard I thought it might break. The headlights came on automatically, illuminating the creature fully. In the full light, I could see even more details I wish I hadn't. Its ribcage was visible through the patchy fur, not like a starving animal, but like its body was designed that way. The way its joints bent seemed wrong, almost backward in places, and its face. God, that face. In the headlights I could see that what I thought was a snout was more like a muzzle, but with human-like features distorted into something monstrous. I threw the cruiser into reverse, spun around, and floored it down the gravel driveway. I didn't look back until I reached the main road. When I did, I couldn't see anything following me, but I swear I could feel those eyes watching from the darkness. I drove straight to the station. My shift was almost over anyway. I sat in the parking lot for about 15 minutes trying to calm down, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Was it a bear with some kind of deformity? A person in some elaborate costume? Neither explanation made sense with what I'd witnessed. I went inside, clocked out, and said nothing. What could I say? Hey, I saw some kind of monster digging up graves at Cypress Hill. They'd have me take a psych evaluation or drug test on the spot. I didn't sleep at all that day. I kept seeing those eyes whenever I closed mine. I called in sick for my next shift, something I rarely did. Spent the whole day researching cryptids and local legends, looking for anything that matched what I'd seen. Found nothing conclusive. When I went back to work the following night, there was a report waiting from the day shift. Someone had called in about vandalism at Cypress Hill Cemetery. One of the graves had been dug up, the coffin inside broken open. The body was missing. I felt sick reading the report. The grave that had been disturbed belonged to an elderly woman who'd been buried just 2 weeks earlier. The officer who took the report had written it off as teenage vandals or maybe some sick occult thing. They had no leads, but I knew. I knew exactly what had happened to that body. I didn't volunteer any information. Who would believe me? Instead, I requested to change my patrol route, making up some excuse about wanting more variety. My sergeant didn't question it. For the remaining weeks I worked there, I never went back to Cypress Hill, especially not at night. But I did drive by during daylight hours once, off-duty in my personal vehicle. I parked on the road and looked up at the cemetery from a distance. In the daylight it looked normal, peaceful even. But I noticed something that made my blood run cold. 3 more fresh mounds of dirt where graves had been recently filled. 3 more potential targets. I quit the force a month later, claiming family reasons, moved to a different county. I told myself it was for a better job opportunity, but really, I couldn't stand being near that place anymore. Couldn't stand the night shifts. Couldn't stand the knowledge of what was out there. It's been 4 years and I've never told anyone this story. Not my wife, not my former colleagues, no one. Sometimes I almost convince myself it was just stress, lack of sleep, maybe some kind of hallucination. But then I remember those eyes, that unnatural movement, and I know what I saw was real. I still check the local news from my old town sometimes. Over the years, there have been more reports of grave desecrations, always at smaller cemeteries, always at night. The pattern is the same. Graves dug up, coffins broken, bodies missing. The local papers blame it on sick pranks or drug addicts. Police never find the culprits. They never will. I don't know what that thing was. I don't know why it takes the bodies or what it does with them. All I know is that it's still out there, and no one is looking for it because no one believes it exists. Sometimes when I'm driving late at night and pass a cemetery, I can't help but scan the darkness between the headstones. Sometimes I think I see movement, and sometimes, just sometimes, I swear I catch a glimpse of those reflective black eyes watching me from the shadows. I keep a loaded gun in my nightstand now. I'm not sure it would even help against that thing, but it helps me sleep a little better. I don't expect anyone to believe this story. Hell, sometimes I don't believe it myself. But I know what I saw, and I know that if you're ever on a quiet country road late at night and happen to pass a cemetery, don't stop. Don't slow down. And whatever you do, don't shine your light into the darkness, because sometimes the darkness looks back. I never wanted to talk about what happened up in the Montana mountains last year. Even typing this now, my hands are shaking. But I need to get this out because it's eating me alive. And maybe someone out there has seen something similar or can tell me I'm not going crazy. After Stephanie died in that car accident 2 years ago, I pretty much threw myself into work. As a geotechnical engineer, I'd typically stay close to civilization, working on foundation designs for buildings or testing soil stability for construction projects. But when an opportunity came up for a remote drilling project in the Bitterroot Range in western Montana, I jumped at it. The isolation appealed to me. I thought maybe being somewhere so far removed from everything would help clear my head. The job seemed straightforward: drill boreholes and collect core samples to determine if the area could support a hydroelectric dam. The company had leased a small cabin about 20 minutes from the initial drilling sites. It was rustic but functional. A main room with a kitchen area, 3 small bedrooms, and a bathroom with finicky plumbing. Our team was small: myself, 2 drill operators named Georgie and Jimmy, and our geologist, Dr. Whitford. Georgie was a heavy-set guy in his 40s with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow who'd been drilling for over 20 years. Jimmy was younger, maybe late 20s, lanky with a constant nervous energy. Dr. Whitford was older than all of us, probably in her late 50s, with short gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses. She had this intense way of examining rock samples, like they were telling her secrets. The first week went by without incident. We'd wake up around 5 a.m., grab coffee and whatever breakfast we could throw together, then drive out to the site in 2 trucks loaded with equipment. We were using a track-mounted rotary drill rig, nothing fancy but perfect for the kind of preliminary testing we were doing. I'd oversee the drilling operations while Dr. Whitford cataloged the core samples we pulled up. By dusk, we'd pack up and head back to the cabin, exhausted but making good progress. It was during the second week that things started getting weird. We'd moved to a new site, higher up the mountain, where the terrain was steeper and more densely forested. The first sign something was off came one evening as we were finishing up. There was this sound, a low, drawn-out moaning that seemed to echo through the valleys. At first I thought it might be wind whipping through the rock formations, but there was barely a breeze that evening. "You guys hear that?" Jimmy asked, looking around nervously. Georgie nodded, his usual joking demeanor suddenly serious. "Probably just a mountain lion or something." Dr. Whitford didn't say anything, but I noticed her frowning as she packed up her samples. We heard the same sound the next 2 evenings, always as dusk was setting in. It seemed to be coming from different directions each time, like whatever was making it was moving around the mountain. On Thursday of that second week, we started drilling at a new location about half a mile further up from our previous site. The geology maps showed we'd likely hit bedrock around 120 meters, but we wanted to go deeper to get a better profile of the underlying strata. Everything started normally. The drill bit chewed through soil, then gravel, then into harder rock layers. We were getting good core samples, and Dr. Whitford seemed pleased with what we were finding. Around midday, when we reached about 80 meters, I felt a weird vibration through the soles of my boots. It wasn't like the normal trembling you get from drilling. This felt deeper, like it was coming from somewhere beneath us. "You feel that?" I asked Georgie, who was operating the drill. He nodded, looking uneasy. "Thought it was just the rig, but it's not matching the rhythm." I told him to pause the drilling, and when he did, the vibration continued for a few seconds before stopping. We all looked at each other, but nobody wanted to be the first to suggest something weird was happening. "Could be seismic activity," Dr. Whitford offered. This region does have some minor fault lines. We decided to continue. As we approached 150 meters, the drill suddenly shuddered violently and slowed, like it had hit something unexpectedly dense. "Pressure's spiking," Georgie called out, checking the gauges. "Whatever this is, it's not normal bedrock." Jimmy was helping feed the drill stem when he suddenly jumped back. "Holy shit, look at this." Around the borehole, the ground was getting wet, but it wasn't water seeping up. It was a thick crimson liquid that looked disturbingly like blood. The smell hit me next, metallic and organic, like raw meat left in the sun too long. Dr. Whitford rushed over with a sample container. "This is unusual," she said, clearly trying to maintain scientific detachment as she collected some of the red fluid. The ground beneath us gave a violent lurch, nearly knocking me off my feet. The drill rig tilted precariously as the earth around the borehole started to bulge upward, like something was pushing from below. "Shut it down," I yelled to Georgie. "Get clear of the rig." He was already scrambling away from the controls as the ground split open about 10 feet from the borehole. What came out, I still don't have words to properly describe it. It was like watching a massive, sinewy muscle push through the earth's skin. The surface was slick with that same crimson fluid and covered in dirt and rocks. It pulsed, actually fucking pulsed, expanding and contracting like it was breathing. Jimmy started screaming, not yelling, not shouting, screaming like a terrified child. Dr. Whitford stood frozen, still clutching her sample container, her face drained of all color. The thing continued to push upward, towering maybe 15 feet above us now. It was wider at the base, maybe 6 feet across, tapering toward what I can only describe as a blunt end, though there was no head or anything recognizable. Just this massive column of pulsing organic material that shouldn't exist. "Run, now!" I finally found my voice, grabbing Dr. Whitford's arm and pulling her toward the trucks. The ground heaved again, and I heard a deafening crash as our drill rig toppled over. Georgie was already at the first truck, frantically trying to get it started. Jimmy was right behind me, sobbing and gasping for air. We piled into the vehicles, me and Jimmy in one, Georgie and Dr. Whitford in the other. I jammed the key into the ignition, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn it. The engine roared to life, and I slammed it into reverse, nearly hitting a tree as I backed up wildly. Through the windshield, I could see that thing continuing to rise from the earth, now at least 25 feet tall and still emerging. The surrounding trees were tilting as the ground around it bulged and cracked. That's when I heard it. The same moaning sound we'd been hearing at dusk, but much, much louder, as if whatever had been calling in the distance was now right here with us. I spun the truck around and started racing down the rough mountain road, Georgie right behind us. In the rearview mirror, I could see trees swaying and falling as something massive moved through the forest. About halfway down the mountain, I heard the sound of metal crushing and glass breaking. Georgie's truck had gone off the side of the road and slammed into a large boulder. We screeched to a halt and ran back. Georgie was climbing out of the driver's side, blood running from a cut on his forehead. Dr. Whitford was pinned in the passenger seat, the dashboard crushed against her legs. "We gotta get her out," Georgie gasped, trying to pull the crumpled door open. Jimmy was looking back up the mountain, his face a mask of terror. "It's coming. I can feel it coming." I could feel it too, a rhythmic trembling in the ground, getting stronger. And that moaning sound was back, echoing through the trees. We managed to pry the door open and pull Dr. Whitford free. Her legs were badly bruised, but not broken. As we helped her to our truck, the forest around us seemed to go silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just that horrible moaning getting louder. "Go, go, go!" Georgie yelled as we piled into the truck. I floored it, the tires spinning on loose gravel before catching. We tore down that mountain road like hell itself was chasing us. Maybe it was. When we finally reached the main highway, we pulled over at a gas station to catch our breath and assess our situation. Dr. Whitford was in shock, clutching her sample container like her life depended on it. Jimmy couldn't stop shaking. Georgie was trying to clean the blood off his face with a dirty t-shirt he'd found in the back of the truck. "What the fuck was that?" Jimmy kept repeating. "What the fuck was that?" None of us had an answer. We drove straight to the local sheriff's office to report what happened. The deputy on duty listened to our story with increasing skepticism. When we finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "So you're telling me you drilled into the ground and some kind of creature came out? And you have no photos, no video, nothing?" In the panic, none of us had thought to grab our phones and take pictures. The only evidence we had was Dr. Whitford's sample of the red fluid, which she refused to hand over, insisting it needed to be properly analyzed first. We called our company next. Our project manager, Dave, was even less receptive than the sheriff's deputy. He accused us of making up wild stories to cover for damaging expensive equipment. When we insisted we were telling the truth, he said he'd send someone out to the site to assess the situation. 2 days later, we were all fired for gross negligence and destruction of company property. The sample Dr. Whitford had collected was confiscated by the company when they came to retrieve our remaining equipment from the cabin. Before we all went our separate ways, Dr. Whitford pulled me aside. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes. "I've been doing some research," she said quietly. "There are local legends about the mountains in this region, stories from Native American tribes about earth spirits that guard what lies beneath the surface. They specifically warned against digging too deep in certain areas. You think that's what we saw? Some kind of spirit?" I couldn't believe I was even considering this. "I don't know, but I managed to save a small amount of that fluid before they took my samples." She showed me a tiny vial with a few drops of the crimson liquid. "I know someone at the university in Missoula who might be able to analyze this discreetly." 2 weeks later, I got a call from Dr. Whitford. She sounded shaken. "The sample is gone," she said. "My contact at the university put it in their secure lab storage, but when they went to retrieve it for testing, the vial was empty. No signs of leakage, no evidence of tampering. It just disappeared." That was the last time I spoke with her. I tried calling Georgie and Jimmy a few times, but their numbers had been disconnected. I looked for other work and tried to convince myself that what we'd seen had some rational explanation. A methane pocket, a previously unknown geological phenomenon, something that made sense. Then, about 6 months later, I saw a small news article online. The hydroelectric dam project in the Bitterroot Range had been permanently shelved due to unexpected geological instability in the region. The article mentioned that all exploratory operations had been halted and the area was now off limits for development. They know. They found something up there that confirmed what we saw, and now they're covering it up. I still dream about it. That pulsing, organic mass pushing through the earth, the crimson fluid, the moaning sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Sometimes I wake up feeling the ground trembling beneath my bed, convinced that whatever we disturbed in those mountains has followed me home. I don't know what we drilled into that day. I don't know if it was some kind of previously undiscovered organism living deep within the earth, or something else entirely. But I know what I saw, what we all saw, and I know that there are things beneath our feet that we were never meant to discover. I've been a Forest Service pilot for 11 years now. Flying helicopters over Washington State's wilderness areas is usually peaceful work, monitoring wildfires, supporting conservation efforts, occasionally helping with search and rescue. Nothing in my training prepared me for what I saw last August, and I'm still struggling with whether I should be sharing this at all. I keep replaying it in my mind. Some days I convince myself I imagined the whole thing, but I know what I saw. And after what happened in Seattle last month, I can't keep quiet anymore. It was a clear Tuesday morning, around 6:30 a.m. The weather report promised perfect flying conditions, so I took off early for a routine patrol over the Olympic National Forest. There had been some illegal logging reports in one of the more remote sections, and I was supposed to document any signs of activity. Just me and the helicopter that day. A Bell 407 for those who care about that sort of thing. The sunrise was just breaking over the mountains, casting this golden light through the mist hanging over the forest canopy. It was breathtaking, like flying through a dream. The Olympic Peninsula has some of the densest, most pristine, old-growth forest in the country. Some of those trees are hundreds of years old, towering 200 feet above the ground. I was about 2 hours into my flight, cruising at around 500 feet above the canopy in a particularly remote section. The terrain below was rough, deep ravines, massive Douglas firs, and western hemlocks creating this impenetrable green blanket. No trails, no roads, the kind of wilderness where you could wander for days without seeing another human being. I remember checking my fuel gauge and making a note in my log when something caught my eye. A movement below that seemed wrong. At first, I thought it might be shadows from clouds passing overhead, but the sky was crystal clear. I adjusted course slightly to investigate, thinking maybe it was elk or deer moving through a clearing. But as I got closer, my brain couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. There was something massive moving through the treetops. Not on the ground, in the treetops. I reduced speed and hovered, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. Below me, stretching across what must have been at least 7 or 8 full-sized pine trees laid end to end, was, I don't even know how to describe it without sounding insane. It looked like a spider, a fucking enormous spider. The thing had to be at least 200, 250 feet long from the tips of its front legs to its back ones. Its body was dark, almost black, but with this weird metallic blue-green sheen where the sunlight hit it. The proportions were all wrong for any animal I've ever seen or heard of. Its legs, Jesus, those legs, were impossibly long and spindly, but obviously incredibly strong. Each one ended in what looked like a hook or claw that grasped the treetops as it moved. And the way it moved, it was simultaneously the most graceful and terrifying thing I've ever witnessed. It didn't crash through the canopy like you'd expect from something so massive. Instead, it seemed to distribute its weight perfectly, causing the trees to sway just slightly as it transferred from one to another. Like it knew exactly how much pressure each tree could take. It never once touched the ground. I hovered there for maybe 15 seconds, completely frozen. My training went out the window. I should have been taking pictures, recording video, noting coordinates, anything. Instead, I just stared, trying to convince myself I wasn't hallucinating. The creature stopped moving suddenly, and I swear to God, I felt like it sensed me watching. There was this moment, just a fraction of a second, where I thought I saw something that might have been eyes reflect the morning sunlight. Not 2 eyes, many, too many. That's when my instincts finally kicked in. I started fumbling for my phone to take a picture, but my hands were shaking so badly I dropped it between the seats. By the time I recovered it and looked up, the thing was moving again, faster now, heading deeper into the forest. I snapped out of my shock and banked the helicopter around to follow, desperate to get visual confirmation that I wasn't losing my mind. I circled the area where I'd last seen it, but it was gone, completely vanished. Something that size shouldn't be able to disappear so quickly, but it did. I spent another 45 minutes searching the area, flying in expanding circles, dropping lower than I probably should have given the terrain. Nothing. No sign it had ever been there. No broken trees, no unusual clearings, nothing. I finally gave up and continued my patrol, though my mind wasn't on logging violations anymore. I kept replaying what I'd seen, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was an unusual cloud formation, a strange light effect, some kind of mass bird migration creating an optical illusion. But I knew better. I'd seen it clearly. It was solid. It was moving with purpose. And it was unlike anything that should exist in this world. When I got back to base, I sat in the helicopter for a long time, debating what to do. Who would I even tell? What would I say? Hey, I just saw a spider the size of a Boeing 737 walking through the treetops. I'd be grounded for a psych eval before I finished the sentence. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those long legs moving through the trees, that massive body with its metallic sheen. I started volunteering for extra patrols in that area, hoping to see it again, to confirm I wasn't crazy. But there was nothing. About a month after the incident, I finally broke down and told two of my fellow pilots, Michael and Jenna. We've flown together for years, and if anyone would give me the benefit of the doubt, it would be them. Michael looked concerned, not about giant spiders, but about my mental health. Jenna was more open to it, asking detailed questions, but I could tell she thought I'd probably seen something more mundane, and my mind had played tricks on me. Neither of them outright called me crazy, but the conversation changed whenever I brought it up after that. So I stopped talking about it, started doubting myself, wondered if maybe I should see someone professional, but I knew what I saw. Then, last month, everything changed. There was an aviation conference in Seattle that a bunch of us from the service attended. Mostly boring talks about fuel efficiency and new safety protocols, but there's always good networking. On the second night, there was this mixer at the hotel bar. I ended up talking with this guy, Felix, a pilot for a private geological survey company working throughout the Pacific Northwest. We were just making small talk about flying conditions in different parts of Washington when he mentioned a weird experience he'd had while surveying in the Northern Cascades back in May. My ears perked up immediately. "It's going to sound crazy," he said, lowering his voice. "I haven't told many people." I encouraged him to continue, trying not to seem too eager. "I was flying early morning just after sunrise," he continued. "The light was coming through the trees at this angle that made everything look golden. I was following this ridgeline when I saw something moving in the canopy." My mouth went dry. I must have visibly reacted because he stopped and studied my face. "You've seen it too, haven't you?" he asked quietly. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "How big was it?" I finally managed to ask. "Massive. At least 200 feet long, like some kind of spider. But that's impossible, right?" The relief I felt was overwhelming. I wasn't crazy. Someone else had seen it too. We spent the next 2 hours in a corner of that bar, comparing notes, confirming details. The size, the metallic sheen of its exoskeleton, the way it moved through the trees without breaking them, the incredible grace despite its size. Even the early morning timing matched. The only difference was the location. His sighting was about 90 miles northeast of mine. Felix had been as reluctant as I was to report what he'd seen. Who would believe it? We exchanged contact information and promised to let each other know if we saw it again. There was this unspoken agreement between us. We needed proof. A photo, a video, coordinates, something concrete. That was 3 weeks ago. I've been taking every patrol I can get in that region since then. I've started bringing a proper camera with a zoom lens, keeping it ready on the seat beside me. I've studied the maps, looking for connections between the two sighting locations, trying to establish a pattern or a territory. Yesterday, I thought I saw something, just a glimpse, a shadow moving unnaturally through a section of forest about 15 miles from my original sighting. I was too far away to be sure, and by the time I changed course to investigate, whatever it was had disappeared. I don't know what this thing is. A previously undiscovered species? Some kind of government experiment gone wrong? Something else entirely? All I know is that it's out there, moving through our forests, and apparently it's been there long enough to develop a perfect system for staying hidden. I'm writing this all down now because I need a record. If I disappear someday while on patrol, at least someone will know what I was looking for. And if anyone else has seen this thing, please reach out. I'm not crazy, and neither are you. The forests of the Pacific Northwest are ancient. They've been here long before us, and they'll be here long after. Maybe we don't know them as well as we think we do. Maybe there are things living in the canopy that have learned to stay away from human eyes. But I saw it. Felix saw it. And I'm going to find it again. I'm going back out tomorrow morning. Same time, same conditions. I'll keep looking until I have proof. What scares me most isn't the creature itself, though God knows it's terrifying enough. It's the thought that it might not be the only one, that there might be more of them out there, moving silently above our heads while we walk beneath the trees, completely unaware. And sometimes, when the wind moves through the forest canopy just right, making the treetops sway in that particular pattern, I can't help but wonder if it's not the wind at all. I still can't believe I'm finally writing this down. It's been over 60 years, but the memories haven't faded a bit. Some nights I still wake up in a cold sweat thinking I hear something scratching at my window. My husband thinks I'm just jumpy from growing up so isolated, but he doesn't know what was out there, what might still be out there. I grew up in a tiny cabin tucked away in the mountains of West Virginia, so deep in the Appalachians that we were a good hour's drive from the nearest small town. My daddy worked as a logger, and Mama kept our home running. We had no electricity until I was nearly 13, just kerosene lamps and a wood stove that kept us warm during those bitter mountain winters. We weren't poor exactly, just simple folk living off what the land provided and what little money Daddy's work brought in. Our cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by dense forest on 3 sides, with a dirt road winding down the mountain on the 4th. We had a chicken coop, a vegetable garden, and an apple tree that produced the sweetest fruit you've ever tasted. It was a beautiful place during daylight hours, but there were rules in our house, strict rules that were never, ever to be broken. 1. No one goes outside after dark, period. 2. No wandering in the woods alone, even during the day. 3. If you hear something outside at night, you don't look out the windows. As a child, I just accepted these rules like I accepted that the sky was blue. They were facts of life. Sometimes I'd ask why, and Mama would just say, "That's how it is up here in the mountains, Margaret. You mind us now." Daddy was even more tight-lipped, just giving me a stern look that shut down any further questions. I was about 10 years old when everything changed. It was the summer of 1959, hot and sticky even up in our mountain hollow. My Uncle Roy had come to visit from Cincinnati, where he worked in a factory. He was Daddy's younger brother, full of city ideas and always laughing at what he called our backwoods ways. "You're raising that girl like it's still the 1800s, he told my parents one night after I'd gone to bed. I wasn't asleep, though, just lying there with my window cracked open to catch any breeze. "She needs to experience a little adventure, not be cooped up in this cabin scared of her own shadow." I heard Daddy's voice get real low, the way it did when he was trying not to lose his temper. "You don't understand how things are up here, Roy. Never have." "Oh, come on, James," Uncle Roy laughed. "What are you so afraid of? Bears? Cougars? I've got my service revolver if that's what's worrying you." There was a long silence, and then Mama's voice, softer than Daddy's but just as firm. "It ain't that kind of thing, Roy." "Well then, what is it?" Uncle Roy pressed. Another long silence. "Let me take little Maggie camping tomorrow night," Uncle Roy said finally. "Just in the yard where you can see us from the porch. Show her the stars properly. Teach her how to build a real campfire. Every kid should have that experience." I held my breath, heart racing with excitement. I'd never been allowed outside after dark, and the idea of sleeping under the stars sounded like the most wonderful adventure. To my shock, after some whispered conversation I couldn't make out, my parents agreed, with conditions. We had to stay in the yard where they could see us, keep a lantern burning all night, and Uncle Roy had to have his gun. The next day was a flurry of excitement. Uncle Roy showed me how to help set up his Army surplus tent in our front yard, about 20 yards from the porch. We gathered firewood, and he taught me how to arrange it just right for a good campfire. Mama packed us sandwiches and a thermos of hot chocolate, even though it was summer. As the sun started to sink behind the mountains, casting long shadows across our clearing, I saw Daddy and Mama exchanging worried glances on the porch. "Maybe this isn't—" Mama started, but Uncle Roy cut her off. "We'll be fine. Look how excited she is. I promise I'll keep her safe." The night started out magical. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks spiraling up toward the star-filled sky. Uncle Roy pointed out constellations I'd never seen before, at least not properly, only glimpsed through my bedroom window. He told me funny stories about Daddy when they were boys, and we toasted marshmallows until my fingers were sticky. As the night deepened, though, I noticed Uncle Roy glancing at the tree line more and more often. The woods seemed to press closer in the darkness, the shadows between the trees deeper than they should be. "Your Daddy always was the jumpy sort," Uncle Roy said, forcing a laugh as he poked at the fire. "Got me jumping at shadows now, too." It was around midnight when we finally crawled into the tent. Uncle Roy placed his revolver within easy reach and set the kerosene lantern between us, turned down low, but still burning. "Just to keep the critters away," he said with a wink, but I noticed he didn't look as relaxed as he had earlier. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when the noise woke me. At first, I thought it was just the wind rustling the tent canvas. But it wasn't coming from above, it was coming from around us. A soft, deliberate sound, like something very large moving quietly through the grass, circling our tent. Uncle Roy was already awake, sitting up rigidly, his hand on his gun. He put a finger to his lips, warning me to stay quiet. His eyes were wide, reflecting the dim lantern light. The circling continued, unhurried but purposeful. Whatever it was big enough that we could feel the ground vibrate slightly with each step. Then it stopped, directly in front of our tent flap. I'll never forget the silence that followed. It was the loudest silence I've ever heard, filled with nothing but my own heartbeat hammering in my ears and Uncle Roy's shallow breathing beside me. Then came the sniffing. Loud, powerful inhalations of air, like a dog but much, much bigger. The tent canvas bulged inward slightly as something pressed against it, about 7 feet up from the ground. Uncle Roy raised his gun, aiming it at the tent wall. His hand was shaking so bad I was afraid he might shoot accidentally. I wanted to scream for my parents, but my voice was frozen in my throat. A low rumble started outside, not quite a growl, not quite anything I'd ever heard before. It was deep, vibrating the ground beneath us, almost like a purr but with something menacing underlying it. The sniffing moved upward, tracking along the tent to where the canvas met at the top, nearly 8 feet high. "Jesus Christ," Uncle Roy whispered. Then it backed away. We heard the heavy footsteps retreating, circling the tent once more, before stopping at the edge of our clearing. There was a pause, then a sound that still haunts my dreams. A long, mournful howl that started deep and rose to a pitch that made my ears hurt. It wasn't a wolf howl, though it had elements of that. It was something else entirely, something that didn't belong in these mountains or maybe anywhere on earth. The howl cut off abruptly, and we heard crashing through the underbrush as whatever it was moved away into the forest. Uncle Roy grabbed my arm. "We're getting to the house, now." He unzipped the tent with one hand, gun still in the other, and practically dragged me across the yard. I was so terrified I couldn't even cry. My legs felt like rubber, barely holding me up. The porch light was already on. Daddy standing there with his shotgun. He didn't look surprised, just grim, like he'd been expecting this all along. Mama pulled me inside and wrapped me in a quilt, though the night was warm. "Did you see it?" Daddy asked Uncle Roy in a low voice. Uncle Roy shook his head, face pale in the lamplight. "No, but it was big, James. Too big." "What was it?" I finally managed to ask, my voice sounding small and far away to my own ears. Nobody answered me. Nobody looked at me at all. The next morning, Uncle Roy left. He barely said goodbye, just threw his bags in his car and took off down the mountain with a quick hug and a promise to write that he never kept. After he was gone, I followed Daddy outside as he walked toward where our tent still stood. The campfire was just ashes now. In the soft earth around the tent were footprints, if you could call them that. They were huge, easily twice the size of Daddy's work boots, but not shaped like any animal tracks I'd ever seen. They were elongated, with what looked like 5 toe marks splayed at the front. They sank deep into the soil, suggesting whatever made them was massively heavy. Daddy stood staring at those tracks for a long time. Then he went to the shed, got a rake, and methodically erased every single one. "Don't tell your mama about the tracks," was all he said. Life went back to normal after that, or what passed for normal in our household. The rules remained firmly in place, but now I understood why. I still didn't know what was out there, but I'd felt its presence, heard its breath, and that was enough. About a month later, our chickens started disappearing. 1 or 2 at a time every few nights. The strange thing was, there was never any sign of struggle, no feathers scattered around, no blood. Even stranger, the coop door was always neatly unlatched, not broken or forced, like something with hands had opened it. Daddy reinforced the coop with a heavy padlock. The next morning, the lock was still in place, but the hasp had been pulled clean out of the wood, the screws bent like they were made of soft wax. 2 more chickens were gone. I started waking up at night, thinking I heard that sniffing sound outside my window. I'd pull the covers over my head and recite the Lord's Prayer until morning came, too terrified to look outside. Then one evening in late August, just before sunset, I was gathering the last of the day's eggs, when I glanced toward our apple tree at the edge of the clearing. Standing beneath it, partially hidden in the lengthening shadows, was something I still struggled to describe. It was tall, taller than Daddy, who stood 6'2". It was hunched over, its body covered in what looked like dark, shaggy hair. Its head was the worst part, elongated, with what seemed like pointed ears and a snout that was too long for any bear or wolf I'd ever seen pictures of. And its eyes caught the last rays of sunlight, reflecting back a deep, burning amber color. I stood frozen, the egg basket clutched in my hand. It stood equally still, watching me. Neither of us moved for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. Then Mama called my name from the porch, her voice sharp with fear. "Margaret, come inside right now." The creature's head snapped toward her voice, then back to me. It took a step back into the deeper shadows, still watching me with those glowing eyes. Then it simply melted away into the darkness between the trees. I ran to the house, eggs forgotten, spilling from my basket onto the ground. That night, Mama finally told me a little of the truth while Daddy sat silently by the fire, staring into the flames. "There are things in these mountains that ain't in any books," she said quietly, stroking my hair as I trembled beside her. "Things the old-timers knew about but didn't talk about much. Some folks call it different names. Werewolf is what my grandma called it, though it ain't exactly that." "What does it want?" I whispered. Mama sighed. "To be left alone, mostly. It stays in its part of the woods, we stay in ours. When folks don't respect that boundary." She trailed off, glancing at Daddy. "Did it hurt someone?" I asked. "My brother," Daddy said suddenly, his voice rough. "Your Uncle David, before you were born. He didn't believe the stories, went hunting alone after dark." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "Is that why Uncle Roy left so fast?" I asked. Daddy nodded. "Roy never believed the stories either. Now he does." I slept in my parents' room that night, sandwiched between them like I was a little girl again. The next day, Daddy built a new chicken coop closer to the house and strung bells all around it. We never spoke of it directly again, though sometimes when the wind howled through the mountains in winter, Mama would give me a knowing look and stoke the fire higher. The rules remained unbroken for the rest of my childhood. When I was 18, I left for nursing school in Charleston and never moved back. My parents stayed until they passed. Daddy in 85, Mama in 92. The cabin was sold, and I've never returned. I tell myself that what I saw was just a bear, deformed perhaps, or some mountain lion variant. The rational part of my mind, shaped by decades in medicine, wants to believe that. But deep down, I know better. Sometimes on dark nights when the wind sounds just right, I think I hear that same sniffing outside my suburban home, and I wonder if it followed me, or if there are more of them spread throughout the dark places of the world where people know better than to wander after sunset. Whatever was in those mountains, it respected boundaries. We stayed out of its territory at night, and it mostly stayed out of ours. An unspoken agreement that kept both sides safe. Until Uncle Roy broke the rules. I've never told this story before now. I'm in my 70s, and I still scan the tree line when I visit my daughter's rural home in Virginia. Some fears you never outgrow, especially when you've seen the eyes that live in the darkness. Even now, I won't go outside after dark if I can help it. Some rules are worth keeping, no matter how far you go from the mountains. I never thought I'd be typing this out, but I need to share what happened to me last month in Allegheny National Forest. I'm still trying to make sense of it all. I used to be a pretty avid hunter, grew up in southern Ohio, and hunting was just part of life. My dad taught me when I was 12, and I kept at it until about 2 years ago when a stupid tick changed everything. Got bit during a weekend trip, and a few weeks later found myself in the ER after eating a burger. Turned out I developed alpha-gal syndrome, basically an allergy to mammal meat. Doctors said it was from that damn tick bite, so that was the end of my hunting days. What's the point when you can't even eat what you harvest? But I still loved being outdoors, so I got more into wilderness camping and survival stuff instead. I'd go out for 3-4 days at a time, usually solo, just living off the land as much as possible. Fish, forage, that kind of thing. Last month I decided to head up to Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania. I'd been there once before but stuck to the marked trails. This time I wanted to go deeper, really get away from everything. I packed light, just my tent, sleeping bag, fishing gear, a good knife, some basic survival tools, and enough emergency rations to get by if things went south. The first couple days were perfect. Weather was good, caught some nice trout in a stream. I was pushing farther in each day, using my GPS occasionally to mark waypoints, but mostly just exploring. By the third day, I was pretty deep in, definitely off any marked trail and into areas where I doubt many people venture. Around midday on that third day, I started noticing something odd. The forest had gotten quieter, not completely silent, but that background noise of birds and insects had dimmed. At first, I figured maybe a storm was coming, but the sky was clear. Still, I kept going, following a faint game trail that wound between some rocky outcroppings. The trail opened up suddenly into a clearing that stopped me in my tracks. It was almost perfectly circular, maybe 30 feet across, with tall trees surrounding it on all sides. The grass in the clearing was short, almost like it had been maintained somehow. But that wasn't what made me freeze. In the middle of the clearing was the strangest gathering of animals I've ever seen. A white-tailed deer, a rabbit, a red fox, and a black bear, all sitting in this rough circle facing each other. Not moving, not making any sounds, just sitting there, completely still, like they were having some kind of meeting. I've spent my whole life in the woods, and I know how animals behave. This wasn't natural. These animals should have been terrified of each other. The rabbit should have bolted the second it sensed the fox or bear. The deer should have been on high alert. But they were just sitting there, completely ignoring me despite being downwind and in plain sight. I stood at the edge of the clearing for what felt like forever, just watching them. My skin was crawling. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but it was dead, despite having nearly 40% battery when I'd checked it an hour earlier. My hands were shaking as I put it back in my pocket. I don't know what made me finally back away, but something in my gut was screaming to get away from there. I carefully retreated, moving backward until I was out of sight of the clearing, then turned and walked fast back the way I'd come for about 15 minutes before stopping to catch my breath. I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe they were sick, some disease making them act weird. But all 4 different species at once, and sitting in that circle? It didn't make any sense. I decided to cut my trip short. I'd camp one more night since it was already afternoon, then head back to my car first thing in the morning. I found a decent spot about 2 miles from that clearing, set up my tent, and tried to relax with some fishing at a nearby stream. Didn't catch anything, which was weird because I'd had luck in similar spots the previous days. That night was one of the worst of my life. I kept hearing rustling around my campsite. Not the normal forest sounds. This was deliberate movement circling my tent. Several times I shined my flashlight out, but never saw anything. I barely slept, just lay there with my knife in one hand and flashlight in the other. When dawn finally broke, I packed up faster than I ever have before. The whole time I felt like I was being watched. I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the trees, but never saw anything. I started hiking back toward my car, pushing a faster pace than I normally would. About an hour into my hike, I found the rabbit. It was placed directly in the middle of the path I was following, not hidden in brush or against a tree where an animal might have dragged it. Just placed there, perfectly centered on the trail, like it was meant for me to find. It was dead, obviously, but here's the part that still gives me chills. Its eyes were gone, not like they'd been pecked out by birds or something. They were just missing. Clean, empty sockets. No blood, no signs of struggle or any other injury. Just the eyes, gone. The rest of the body was completely untouched. I should have turned around right then, found another way back. But I was too freaked out to think straight, so I just stepped around it and kept going, moving even faster now. 20 minutes later, I found the fox. Same deal. Placed right in the middle of the path, eyes missing, body otherwise unmarked. This time I knew it wasn't a coincidence. These were the same animals from that clearing, and someone or something was placing them for me to find. I was practically jogging now, checking my GPS constantly to make sure I was heading toward my car. I kept telling myself I was almost there, even though I knew I had at least 3 more hours of hiking. The deer was next, bigger than the other animals, of course, but positioned the same way, centered in my path, eyeless, its body pristine except for those empty sockets staring at nothing. I had to physically move its legs to get past. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely grip my pack straps afterward. I knew the bear would be next, and the thought of finding it kept me pushing forward at an almost running pace. My lungs were burning and my legs ached, but the fear drove me on. I kept checking behind me, sure that something was following, but never saw anything. When I finally spotted the bear, I almost threw up. It was massive, probably 300 pounds, and like the others, it lay directly across my path. Those empty eye sockets seemed to follow me as I gave it a wide berth, circling around through the underbrush rather than getting close. I don't remember much about the rest of the hike out. I was in a state of panic, convinced that whatever had done this was right behind me. When I finally reached my car, I fumbled the keys 3 times before getting the door open, then locked myself inside and just sat there, gasping for breath, covered in sweat. The drive home was a blur. I kept checking my rear-view mirror, half expecting to see those animals somehow following me. By the time I got home, I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing, that maybe I'd eaten something weird, or the stress of being alone in the woods had gotten to me. I told one friend about it a few days later. He thought I was messing with him at first, then suggested it might have been some kind of bizarre prank, someone drugging animals and placing them as some sick joke. But how would they know which path I'd take, and those eyes, the clean, bloodless way they'd been removed? It still doesn't make sense. It's been a month now, and I still wake up some nights thinking I hear that rustling sound around my house. I've been looking online for similar experiences, but haven't found anything close to what I encountered. Part of me wants to go back, to see if I can find that clearing again, to prove to myself that it was just my imagination or find a rational explanation. But then I remember those empty eye sockets and how those animals were placed specifically for me to find, and I know I'll never set foot in those woods again. I don't know if someone was watching me out there, or if something else is happening in those deep woods that I can't explain. All I know is that what I saw wasn't natural. Those animals weren't acting on instinct. Something was controlling them. And whatever it was, it wanted me to know it was there. I used to feel at home in the forest. Now I keep the blinds closed at night and jump at every sound outside my window. Because sometimes I swear I can hear something circling my house, just like it circled my tent that night in the woods. I'll never forget that day in the Adirondacks. It's been nearly 15 years, but sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking I hear that whistling outside my window. I know it's just my mind playing tricks. At least that's what I tell myself, but I keep my curtains closed just in case. I was 12 that summer when my parents bought this cabin in the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York. It was pretty remote, about 45 minutes from the nearest proper town, down winding forest roads that seemed to get narrower the further you went. My older brother Elijah was 16 and way more into the whole wilderness adventure thing than I was. He'd been begging my parents to let us go camping on our own at this lake he'd discovered while hiking. It was about 3 hours from our cabin by foot, and after weeks of nagging, they finally caved. Mom packed us enough food for 3 days, though we were only planning to stay for one night. Dad gave Elijah his old compass and a folded-up trail map and made us promise to stick to the marked paths. They were being cautious, but not overly worried. Elijah had done the Junior Ranger program for years and knew his way around the woods better than most adults. We set out early that morning in late July. The hike itself was actually pretty nice. The weather was perfect, not too hot, with a light breeze keeping the bugs away. I remember complaining about my backpack being too heavy around hour 2, and Elijah rolling his eyes but taking some of my stuff anyway. That was Elijah, annoyed but always looking out for me. We reached the lake around noon. It was beautiful, clear blue water surrounded by pine trees with a small rocky beach on one side. No other people, just us. Elijah picked a spot to set up our tent about 30 feet from the water's edge in a small clearing surrounded by trees. We spent the afternoon swimming, skipping rocks, and Elijah even caught a couple of small fish that we cooked over the fire for dinner. Everything was completely normal until twilight started to settle in. We were sitting by our campfire, roasting marshmallows and talking about school starting up in a month when I first heard it. At first it was so faint I thought it might be the wind or maybe birds. But then it got a little louder, someone whistling. Not right next to us, but not super far away either, maybe 100 yards through the trees. I didn't think much of it initially. Other hikers probably. But then I recognized the tune. "Elijah," I said, lowering my marshmallow stick. "Do you hear that?" He nodded, already alert, his head tilted slightly. "Yeah, sounds like someone whistling." "It's Mom's lullaby," I said, feeling a weird chill despite the warmth of the fire. Starlight Journey. Our mom used to sing us this lullaby when we were little. It wasn't a common one. She said her grandmother taught it to her. It had this distinctive melody that went up and down in a specific pattern, something you wouldn't mistake for another song. Elijah frowned. Maybe it's just a coincidence. There are only so many tunes people whistle. But it wasn't a coincidence. It was definitely Starlight Journey, every note exactly as Mom sang it. "Hello?" Elijah called out, standing up. "Anyone there?" The whistling stopped immediately. Dead silence except for the crackling of our fire and the light lapping of water at the lake's edge. We exchanged looks, and I could tell Elijah was trying to seem calm for my sake. But his eyes had that focused intensity they get when he's worried. Probably just hikers passing by, he said, sitting back down. They heard us and moved on. I nodded, but neither of us really believed it. Why would some random hiker be whistling our mom's lullaby? And why not answer when we called out? We tried to go back to normal, but the mood had shifted. About 10 minutes later, the whistling started again. Same tune, Starlight Journey. But now it was coming from a different direction, from behind us, deeper in the forest. They're moving around the lake, Elijah said quietly, though we both knew the whistling wasn't following the shoreline. It was moving through the dense forest, circling our campsite. I remember checking the time on my watch, 8:37 p.m. Still some light in the sky, but the forest around us was getting dark. The whistling continued for about a minute, then stopped again. Elijah grabbed a big stick from our firewood pile and stood up. "Hey!" he shouted into the trees. "We can hear you. What do you want?" Nothing. Just the soft breeze through the pines and the distant call of a loon on the lake. "Maybe we should pack up," I suggested, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. Elijah hesitated, looking around. "It's getting dark. Hiking back now might be more dangerous than staying. Let's just keep the fire going and take turns keeping watch tonight." I nodded, but I could feel fear settling into my stomach like a cold stone. Something felt very wrong. We decided to get in the tent but leave the fire going. Elijah said he'd take first watch and I should try to sleep, like that was going to happen. I was lying in my sleeping bag, staring at the tent ceiling, when the whistling started again. Now it was coming from yet another direction, to our right, maybe 150 yards away. Still the same distance, but moving position. Still that same haunting tune. "Elijah," I whispered, though there was no need to whisper. If someone was out there, they knew exactly where we were. "I hear it," he said grimly. He was sitting at the tent entrance, peering out into the darkness. The whistling went on longer this time. It completed the entire lullaby, then started over, and then, about halfway through the second repetition, the tune changed. It wasn't Starlight Journey anymore. It was something else, something vaguely familiar but that I couldn't place. Slower, more drawn out, almost mournful. That's when Elijah zipped the tent closed and turned to me, his face looking pale even in the dim light of our small lantern. "We're leaving," he said. "Right now. Pack your stuff." I didn't argue. We packed as quickly and quietly as possible, which wasn't very quiet at all. The whole time, the whistling continued, that unknown melody floating through the trees. It maintained the same distance, never getting closer, but never going away either. We stepped out of the tent with our backpacks and flashlights. The fire was still going, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for us like fingers. I've never forgotten that image, our little campsite, once cozy, now feeling like a target in the bullseye of something we couldn't see. "We're going to hike back to the cabin," Elijah said in a low voice. "Stay close to me. Don't run unless I say run, okay?" I nodded, too scared to speak. I remember my mouth felt so dry. We left the tent set up. Elijah said it wasn't worth the time to break it down. We just needed to go. We headed toward the trail with our flashlights pointing ahead, the beams seeming pathetically small against the vast darkness of the forest. The whistling stopped as soon as we started walking, which somehow felt worse than if it had continued. Now we couldn't tell where it, whoever or whatever, was. We walked in silence for about 20 minutes, moving as fast as we could without running or making too much noise. The trail was narrow but clear enough to follow with our flashlights. I kept looking back over my shoulder, expecting to see someone or something following us, but there was only darkness. Then we reached a fork in the trail. I remember Elijah stopping, studying the map with his flashlight. "This wasn't on the map," he muttered. I don't remember this from the hike-in. That's when we heard it again. Not whistling this time, humming. The same unfamiliar, mournful tune that had replaced Starlight Journey, but now being hummed in a low voice that didn't sound quite human. It was coming from the left fork of the trail. Without a word, Elijah grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the right fork. This path looked less traveled, overgrown in places, but at that moment, all we cared about was getting away from that humming. "This will take longer," Elijah whispered as we hurried along the right fork, "but it should still get us back to the main trail eventually." I don't know how long we walked. It felt like hours. My watch said it was past midnight when the trail finally widened and began to look familiar. We had somehow connected back to the main path, but much further along than we should have been. By some miracle, or dumb luck, we'd actually cut off some distance despite taking what seemed like a detour. We didn't hear the whistling or humming again that night. We reached our cabin just as dawn was breaking, exhausted and jumpy, but safe. Our parents were still asleep. They had no idea we'd come back early. We never told them what happened. Elijah said it would just worry them, and they'd never let us go hiking alone again. Instead, we told them the next morning that we got bored and hiked back early. Dad seemed suspicious but didn't press it. About a week later, there was news about a hiker who had gone missing near that same lake. Search and rescue teams were looking for him. I remember the cold feeling that spread through my chest when I heard that, and the look Elijah and I exchanged across the dinner table. But we still didn't say anything. They never found that hiker. Years passed. I grew up, went to college, moved to the city. Our family kept the cabin, but we visited less frequently as Elijah and I got older and busier with our own lives. I avoided going back to those woods whenever possible, making excuses about work or other commitments. Elijah, though, he never lost his love for the outdoors. Even after that night, he kept hiking, kept exploring. He said one bad experience shouldn't ruin the whole forest for us. I thought he was crazy. Then, 3 years ago, he called me late one night. His voice sounded different, tight, controlled. "I went back to that lake today," he said without preamble. My blood went cold. "Why would you do that?" "I needed to know," he said simply. "I've been doing research." He told me he'd stayed at the cabin for a week by himself, hiking different trails, talking to locals about the area. Then he'd finally worked up the courage to go back to that lake. He said it was beautiful in the daylight, peaceful. Nothing seemed amiss, until he heard it again, the whistling, Starlight Journey, note for note. I felt sick hearing this, but Elijah wasn't done. "I found something out," he said, "about the lullaby. It's not just Mom's song. It's an old folk song from this region. Really old." He'd talked to an elderly woman in town who recognized it when he hummed it for her. She called it "The Wanderer's Call" and said it was a song about travelers being lured into the woods by spirits who whistle or sing to them. The spirits supposedly mimic tunes familiar to their targets, then gradually change to their own song once they've got their attention. She said her grandmother warned her never to follow the whistling in the Adirondacks, Elijah told me. Said those who do never come back. I asked him what he did when he heard the whistling again at the lake. He was quiet for a moment. "I ran," he finally said, "and I'm not going back." That was the last time we ever talked about it. But sometimes, when I'm visiting my parents and staying in that cabin, I swear I can hear faint whistling carried on the night breeze, And on really bad nights, back in my apartment in the city, when I jolt awake at 3 a.m. for no reason, I imagine I hear it outside my window, that tune starting as Starlight Journey and then slowly transforming into that other melody I still can't identify. I know it's just my imagination. It has to be. But I still keep my curtains closed, just in case. Because whatever was out there in those mountains, whatever knew our mother's lullaby and used it to try to lure us deeper into the woods, I don't want it finding me again. And I still haven't been able to explain why, when I hear that whistling in my mind, it feels like it's getting closer. I never thought I'd be sharing this. I've replayed it in my head thousands of times, trying to convince myself there's a logical explanation, but there isn't. What happened to me in the Oregon wilderness 3 months ago defies explanation, and I'm still not sleeping right because of it. I'm an avid hiker, and have spent most of my life exploring the Pacific Northwest. I've always preferred solo trips, just me, my backpack, and miles of untouched nature. I've ventured into parts of Oregon's forests that most people never see, places where cell service doesn't exist and GPS signals struggle. Nothing had ever scared me out there until that day. It was supposed to be a routine 4-day trek through a remote section of national forest near the Cascade Range. I'd studied the maps, packed properly, and left my itinerary with my sister like I always do. The weather forecast was perfect. Mild temperatures, clear skies. I remember feeling excited as I parked my Subaru at a rarely used trailhead about 5 hours from Portland. The first day went exactly as planned. I covered about 12 miles of beautiful terrain, set up camp by a stream, cooked my freeze-dried meal, and slept under a blanket of stars. Nothing unusual. The weirdness started on day 2. I'd been hiking since dawn, making good time on the unmarked trail I was following based on topographical maps and compass bearings. Around mid-afternoon, I noticed the forest starting to thin out in a way that didn't match my maps. According to every piece of information I had, I should have been in dense woodland for at least another day's hike. Instead, I was approaching what looked like a clearing. As I got closer, I could make out structures, buildings, which was impossible. There's nothing out there, no settlements, no ranger stations, nothing. At least nothing documented. But there it was, a small town nestled in a valley I was descending into. Not just some ramshackle cabins, but an actual town with a main street. It looked like one of those preserved western towns you'd visit as a tourist attraction, except completely out of place and impossible in its location. I checked my GPS. Nothing. Just wilderness coordinates. I checked my paper maps again. Nothing indicated a settlement anywhere near my position. My first thought was that I'd somehow gotten wildly off track, but my compass readings and the surrounding mountains confirmed I was exactly where I thought I was. I should have turned around. Every instinct told me something was wrong, but curiosity got the better of me. I needed to know what this place was. As I approached, the strangest detail became apparent. The town looked perfectly maintained, not abandoned or decrepit, but like someone had just swept the wooden sidewalks that morning. The buildings were painted, the glass windows clean, no boarded-up storefronts or signs of neglect. Yet there wasn't a single person visible anywhere. "Hello?" I called out as I reached the edge of what appeared to be the main street. My voice sounded unnaturally loud in the silence. No response, no movement. Nothing but the slight creaking of a wooden sign hanging from one of the buildings. The sign read, "Welcome to Oak Ridge," which made no sense because the actual town of Oak Ridge, Oregon, was over 70 miles away from where I was standing. I walked slowly down the main street, my boots making hollow sounds on the wooden sidewalk. There were maybe 15 buildings in total. What looked like a saloon, a general store, a small hotel, and various other businesses you'd expect in a small western town. But something was profoundly wrong about all of it. The buildings looked occupied from the outside, curtains in windows, potted plants on porches, even a rocking chair gently swaying in the breeze outside what appeared to be a barber shop. But peering through windows revealed completely empty interiors, not abandoned empty, but never been occupied empty. No furniture, no fixtures, nothing but bare floors and walls. The general store had groceries painted in perfect lettering on its window, but inside was just empty shelving. The saloon had swinging doors that moved when I pushed them, but beyond was just a vacant room with a bar counter and nothing else. No bottles, no glasses, no chairs or tables. It was like walking through a movie set, but more unsettling because of how remote and impossible this place was. I checked my watch, 3:45 p.m., plenty of daylight left, but suddenly I wanted nothing more than to get away from this place and back to normal wilderness. As I turned to leave, I heard it for the first time. A low, resonating sound that reminded me of a foghorn, but deeper, more guttural. It echoed through the valley, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I froze, scanning the surrounding forest edge for the source. That's when I noticed the fog. It wasn't there minutes ago, but now a thick mist was rolling in from the forest, enveloping the trees at the edge of town. The temperature dropped noticeably, and I could see my breath forming clouds in front of my face. The foghorn sound came again, closer this time, followed immediately by something new, a rapid clicking noise. The best way I can describe it is like someone repeatedly tapping long fingernails or claws against a hard surface, but faster than humanly possible. Click, 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 click. It made my skin crawl. I'm not proud of what I did next, but animal instinct took over. Instead of heading back into the forest where the sounds were coming from, I ran deeper into the town, looking for somewhere to hide. The fog was advancing faster than any natural weather pattern I'd ever seen, and the clicking sound was getting louder. I tried the door of the empty hotel, locked. Same with the saloon and what looked like a sheriff's office. Finally, I reached a building at the far end of the street with Martin's Market painted above the door. The door swung open when I pushed it, and I stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me. Like the other buildings, it was completely empty inside except for bare shelving and a counter, but it had intact windows, and the door had a deadbolt. I locked it, then moved to the windows to look outside. The fog had completely engulfed the town now. I could barely see across the street. The clicking had stopped, replaced by silence so absolute it felt physical against my eardrums. Then I heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps on the wooden sidewalk outside. Whatever was making them was large. Each step made the floorboards of the porch creak loudly. They weren't human steps. They had an odd rhythm to them, almost like the gait of an animal walking on its hind legs. I ducked below the window, heart pounding so hard I was certain it could be heard. The footsteps stopped right outside the store. I held my breath. A low, rumbling growl came from directly outside the door, a sound unlike anything I've ever heard. Not a bear, not a cougar, not any wildlife I'm familiar with. It was reptilian somehow, but with a depth and resonance that made my teeth vibrate. Then came a sniffing sound, loud and aggressive, as if something was scenting the air. I silently moved behind the counter, curling into the smallest ball I could manage. The doorknob rattled once, twice, then silence. For a brief moment, I thought maybe it had moved on. Then came a violent thud against the door that shook the entire building. Then another and another. Whatever was out there was trying to break in. The deadbolt was holding, but with each impact I could hear the wood around the lock splintering. I frantically looked around for a weapon, a back exit, anything. There was a door behind the counter that I hadn't noticed before. As quietly as possible, I crawled to it and tried the handle. It opened into a small storage room with another door at the back, presumably an exit to the rear of the building. I closed the storage room door behind me just as I heard the front door give way with a crash of breaking wood. The clicking sound started again, now inside the store, accompanied by those heavy footsteps slowly moving across the floor. The back door was my only hope, but when I tried it, the handle wouldn't turn. Locked or jammed, it didn't matter. I was trapped in a windowless storage room, with something hunting me just outside the door. I could hear it moving methodically through the store, knocking over the empty shelving units one by one. It wasn't randomly searching. It was systematically eliminating hiding spots, and it was sniffing constantly, tracking me by scent. In the darkness of the storage room, I fumbled for my backpack, trying to be silent. I needed my flashlight, my knife, anything. But in my panic earlier, I'd left my pack in the main part of the store. The storage room door had no lock. I pressed my body against it, hoping my weight would be enough if the thing tried to open it. The footsteps got closer, the sniffing more pronounced. It knew where I was. Something scratched at the door. Long, sharp somethings dragging slowly across the wood. The sound made my blood turn to ice. Then came the growl again, right on the other side of the door, so close I could feel hot breath seeping through the crack underneath. The door pushed against me, just slightly at first, then with increasing pressure. I pushed back with everything I had, boots braced against the opposite wall, back against the door, but it was like trying to hold back a car. The door opened inch by inch despite my efforts. Through the widening crack, I could see nothing but darkness, but the sniffing and growling filled the space. The clicking sound had stopped. Whatever was pushing wasn't using its claws or hands or whatever made that noise. It was using its body weight, slowly and inexorably forcing its way in. Just as I was certain I couldn't hold any longer, that foghorn sound blasted again, incredibly loud, like it was right in the town. The pressure on the door immediately stopped. A different sound came from the creature, a high-pitched, ear-splitting screech that made me cover my ears in pain. The heavy footsteps retreated rapidly, crashing through the store and out the broken front door. I stayed frozen in place, unable to move, listening as the footsteps faded and silence returned. I don't know how long I stayed in that storage room. Hours, probably. I was too terrified to move until sunlight started seeping through the cracks in the walls. The fog had lifted, and the morning sun illuminated dust particles dancing in the beams of light. When I finally worked up the courage to leave the storage room, the store was a mess of knocked-over shelving units and deep gouges in the wooden floor. Gouges made by something with claws strong enough to dig into solid oak. My backpack was where I dropped it, untouched. I grabbed it and ran out of the store, not slowing down until I'd reached the edge of town. In the daylight, the empty building seemed even more wrong, too perfect, too clean, too fake. I didn't stop to investigate further. I hiked out of there as fast as I could, not following my planned route, but heading directly toward where I thought the nearest paved road would be. I walked for nearly 18 hours straight, through the night, using my flashlight until the batteries died, then continuing under moonlight. When I finally reached a highway and managed to flag down a trucker, I was dehydrated, exhausted, and probably seemed insane. The trucker was kind enough to drive me to the nearest town with a hotel, where I collapsed for nearly 24 hours. After recovering, I checked maps, satellite images, Forest Service records, anything that might explain what I found. There's nothing in the historical record about a settlement where I was hiking. No ghost towns, no abandoned movie sets, nothing. 3 weeks later, I convinced my friend Mark, who's as experienced a hiker as I am, to go back with me. We had GPS devices, cameras, even a small drone. We followed my exact route based on the coordinates I'd recorded before things got weird. We found nothing. No town, no buildings, not even a clearing. Just unbroken forest exactly as the map showed it should be. We spent 2 days searching the area where I know the town was, but there wasn't a single trace of human construction. Mark tried to be supportive, but I could tell he thought I'd hallucinated the whole thing. Maybe he's right. Maybe I had a mental break out there alone in the wilderness. But I have the scars on my palms from pressing against that storage room door so hard. And sometimes, when I'm drifting off to sleep, I hear that clicking sound again, faint but unmistakable. Click, 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 click. I don't hike alone anymore. I don't go into unfamiliar forests. And I never ever ignore when something feels wrong about a place. Because whatever was hunting in that impossible town is still out there somewhere in the Oregon wilderness. And I don't think I was meant to escape it. I've debated for years whether to share this. Some things you experience just sound too crazy when you try to explain them to others. But I need to get this off my chest, even if nobody believes me. This happened back in '87 when I was living rough in the New Jersey Pine Barrens. Yeah, living rough is a nice way of putting it. Truth is, I was a homeless junkie avoiding several warrants and trying to stay off the grid. I'd been hiding out there for about 8 months, moving my camp every few weeks to avoid rangers or hikers stumbling onto me. My routine was pretty simple. I'd emerge from the forest every couple days to hit up small convenience stores, occasionally shoplifting when I was desperate. Once a week, I'd meet my dealer at a specific gas station off Route 72. He'd front me stuff that I'd pay for by doing odd jobs around nearby towns, landscaping, garbage removal, helping people move, anything for cash under the table where I wouldn't need ID. My camp was basic but functional. I had a small tent, a sleeping bag I'd stolen from a camping store, and a backpack with my essentials. I kept moving deeper into the forest as weeks went by, finding places where even the occasional hikers didn't venture. The isolation was both a blessing and a curse. It kept me hidden, but the loneliness ate at me. My life wasn't always like this. I had a decent job as a mechanic until I got hooked on painkillers after a back injury. When the prescription stopped, I turned to harder stuff. Lost my job, apartment, and eventually my family stopped taking my calls. The warrants were for possession and skipping court dates. Nothing violent, but enough to land me in county for a while, which terrified me. That particular week had been especially rough. I'd gone to meet my dealer at our usual spot only to find cops swarming the gas station. I kept driving past without stopping, heart pounding. Later that night, I saw his face on the local news playing at a bar I'd snuck into. He'd been arrested in a massive sting operation. This was catastrophic. I had maybe 2 days' worth of junk left and no way to get more. No connections, no backup plan. I knew what was coming. The sickness, the pain, the desperate cravings. I've been through withdrawal before, but never out in the woods, completely alone. By the 3rd day, it hit me full force. I was shaking, sweating, throwing up, and feeling like my skin was crawling with insects. Every joint ached like it was being twisted apart. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Just lay there in my tent, curled in a ball, wishing I would die. On day 5, I was still sick, but at least able to move around. The worst of the physical symptoms had passed, but my mind was all over the place. I felt paranoid, anxious, and desperate for distraction from the cravings. I decided to venture deeper into the forest than I'd ever gone before, anything to keep my mind off wanting to score. The Pine Barrens in late October is a strange place. The pine trees create this dense canopy that blocks a lot of sunlight, and the sandy soil makes for weird acoustics. Sounds don't travel normally. It feels ancient somehow, like you've stepped back in time to when the land was wild and unpredictable. I hiked for hours, not really caring where I was going. My brain was foggy, but the physical exertion felt good after days of being curled up sick. The air was crisp and cool, and occasional sunlight filtered through the trees in these beautiful beams that normally would have lifted my spirits. But the withdrawal had left me hollow, just going through motions without feeling anything. By late afternoon, I realized I'd gone much farther than intended. I didn't recognize any landmarks, and the forest seemed different here, older, the trees more gnarled, the underbrush thicker. A small stream ran through a clearing, so I decided to make camp there for the night. I had my backpack with basic supplies, a lighter, some canned food, a small pot for water. Setting up my one-person tent, I felt this weird sensation of being watched. I kept looking over my shoulder, but there was never anything there. Just shadows shifting as the wind moved through the pines. I told myself it was just paranoia from the withdrawal, but the feeling persisted. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped dramatically. The barrens get cold at night in autumn. I built a small fire and huddled close to it, eating cold beans straight from the can. The forest was oddly quiet. No crickets or frogs, which struck me as strange. Usually the barrens are alive with sounds at night, but here there was nothing but the occasional crack of my fire. Around midnight I finally managed to fall into an uneasy sleep beside the dying embers. I don't know how long I was out when a sound jerked me awake, branches breaking, heavy and deliberate, like something large was moving through the underbrush. At first I froze, thinking it might be a bear. We have black bears in New Jersey, and while they're usually shy, they can be dangerous if startled. I slowly sat up, trying to make out shapes in the darkness. The moon was nearly full, casting enough light to see the clearing in the edge of the forest, about 30 feet away. The sound came again, branches snapping, closer this time. My heart started hammering in my chest. I reached for my flashlight, unsure if I should use it. What if it attracted whatever was out there? But I needed to see. I clicked it on, pointing it toward the sound. The beam cut through the darkness, and for a moment I saw nothing. Then there was movement at the tree line. Something large and pale emerged from between the pines. It was a horse, a massive white horse, standing perfectly still at the edge of the clearing, staring directly at me. My first confused thought was, who the hell would be riding a horse through the pine barrens at night? But as I swept the flashlight around, I saw no rider, just this enormous white horse, its coat almost luminous in the moonlight. Relief washed over me. Just a horse, probably escaped from some farm. Weird, but not threatening. I lowered my flashlight. That's when I noticed its eyes. They were glowing red, not reflecting red like animals' eyes sometimes do in light, but actively glowing, like two burning embers set in its skull. I blinked hard, convinced I was hallucinating. Withdrawal can mess with your perception. But when I looked again, those eyes were still there, still burning red in the darkness. The horse took a step forward, and I scrambled to my feet. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, that this wasn't just a horse. It took another step, then another, moving with an unnatural stiffness. Its head remained perfectly level, those red eyes never blinking, never shifting away from me. Then it charged. One moment it was walking slowly, the next it was hurtling across the clearing toward me with impossible speed. I didn't think, just reacted, diving to the side as it thundered past. I felt the rush of air as it missed me by inches. I rolled onto my back, expecting it to circle around for another charge, but the clearing was empty. The horse had vanished, completely gone, like it had never been there at all. My breath came in ragged gasps. I scrambled to my feet, spinning in circles, pointing my flashlight in every direction. Nothing. Just the silent pines and the cold moonlight. Hallucination, I whispered to myself. Just the withdrawal, not real. I repeated it like a mantra, trying to calm my racing heart. Something crashed in the canopy above me. My flashlight beam shot upward, trembling in my hand. Through the pine branches, I caught a glimpse of something large moving, branches bending and snapping under its weight. Something that shouldn't be up there. Something heavy. I ran. Grabbing only my backpack, I abandoned my tent and just ran blindly into the forest. Branches whipped my face, roots tried to trip me, but terror gave me speed I didn't know I had. Behind me, I heard it moving through the treetops, following me. The sound was all wrong, too heavy for a bird or squirrel, too agile for anything as large as what I'd seen. It was keeping pace with me, crashing from tree to tree overhead. I don't know how long I ran. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The thing pursued me relentlessly, always just behind or above me, never quite seen, but always heard. Eventually, I broke through into another clearing, larger than the first. Gasping for breath, I spun around, my flashlight beam dancing wildly through the trees. Silence. The crashing had stopped. For several minutes I stood there, turning in slow circles, waiting. My breath formed small clouds in the cold air. Sweat froze on my skin. The forest seemed to be holding its breath. Then I saw it again. The white horse, standing at the opposite edge of the clearing, watching me with those burning red eyes. "What do you want?" I screamed, my voice cracking with fear. It took a step forward, another, then stopped. Something was happening to it. In the moonlight, I watched as its pure white coat began to darken, like ink spreading through water. Within seconds, it was no longer white, but the deepest black I'd ever seen, a black that seemed to absorb the moonlight around it. But that wasn't the worst part. From its forehead, two protrusions began to emerge, twisting and growing upward. Antlers, massive, branching antlers that spread outward like gnarled hands reaching for the sky. Its body contorted, the spine arching unnaturally. Then, with a sound like wet fabric tearing, two enormous wings erupted from its back, unfurling like leathery sails. They stretched wide, blocking the moonlight, casting the creature's shadow across the entire clearing. It was no longer a horse. It was something else entirely, something ancient and terrible. The Jersey Devil, the legend of the Pine Barrens, the monster from campfire stories. It was real, and it was standing right in front of me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could only stare in absolute horror as the creature took another step toward me. Its movements were wrong now. No longer a horse's gait, but something jerky and insectile. It opened its mouth, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. Then it let out a scream that no earthly creature could make, a high, piercing shriek that seemed to cut through my skull like a knife. I don't remember running, don't remember falling. My next clear memory is waking up as sunlight filtered through the pines. I was lying face down in the dirt, my clothes torn and filthy, my backpack still clutched in one hand. My flashlight was gone. My body ached like I'd been beaten, and dried blood crusted one side of my face from a gash on my forehead. Shakily, I got to my feet. The clearing where I'd hallucinated the creature was nowhere in sight, just endless pines in every direction. I had no idea where I was or how far I'd run. It took me most of that day to find my way back to the roads. I avoided my camp, avoided anywhere deep in the forest. I just wanted out, wanted civilization and people and bright lights that would chase away the memory of those burning red eyes. 2 days later, I walked into a police station in Toms River and turned myself in. I told them about the warrants, gave them my real name. The withdrawal, the terror in the forest, they had broken something in me. I couldn't keep running, couldn't go back to that life. I served 14 months in county jail, got clean, participated in every program they offered. When I got out, I stayed clean. Found a halfway house, then a job stocking shelves at a grocery store. Saved enough for community college classes. That was over 30 years ago now. Today I'm a librarian at a small public library not far from the Pine Barrens. I have a modest house, a cat, and a quiet life that most would find boring. I've never touched drugs again, never been back to the Barrens. Sometimes I try to convince myself that what I saw that night was just a hallucination brought on by withdrawal. The mind can play terrible tricks, especially when the body is in distress. Maybe I encountered a real horse that my brain transformed into something monstrous. Maybe it was all just a vivid nightmare I experienced while unconscious in the forest. But then I remember those eyes, the way it changed before me, the sound of its scream. And I know deep in my bones that whatever I encountered that night was real. Whether it was truly the Jersey Devil of legend or something else entirely, I don't know. But I do know this: it changed me forever. In some strange way, the terror of that night saved my life, pushed me to change when nothing else had worked. I've researched the Jersey Devil extensively over the years. Being a librarian has its perks. The descriptions vary, but many match what I saw. The horse-like appearance, the wings, the antlers, the transition from white to black. People have been reporting sightings since the 1700s. Am I one of them, a true witness, or just another addict who had a particularly vivid hallucination? I still don't know. All I know is that I never want to find out for sure. I'll stay in my little house with my books and my cat, and I'll never set foot in those pines again. Because whatever waits there, real or imagined, its power over me is very real. And sometimes, late at night when the wind howls, I swear I can hear it scream again, calling from the distant forest, calling for me.